Today's tutor, Kat Croxford, took part in Landscape Artist of the Year in 2024 at Dunnottar Castle in Aberdeenshire.
It's fabulous being here, and there's a wonderful fish on in the air. I'm very excited.
Where she impressed with her expressive painting style.
Kat's painting is really robust. That black's been used in a really effective way to show the undulation of the rock face.
The enormity of it and the tiny bit of sky actually makes me feel like I'm sort of falling into it.
Kat's paintings start with a dark ground.
I like high contrast and I like strong colours, so I have to layer up the paint in order to get to those lightest areas, and it gives it a little bit of drama.
Which she will be demonstrating in today's masterclass, Painting on Black.
I'm going to be showing you how to paint on black today, which sounds completely counterintuitive when you're painting a landscape that's got lots of wonderful light and beautiful depths. But I'm going to show you how you can create an extra level of colour, layering up the acrylics to create a light-filled and exciting landscape. I'm going to be working from photographs today, and I've actually taken a zoom in for it as well, because I want to concentrate on various elements. And I think it's a good thing when you're working from photograph or from light to have a photograph that has at least 3 elements in there. So we've got some foliage, we have the hedge that's taking us into the composition, we have some of the background, and we have the ground, this lovely, warm walkway that's going to pull us in and give us a little bit of reward when we look at the painting. So I've already painted the canvas black. I've used acrylic, and I'm going to be using acrylic today because it's lovely and fast drying. So I've used just a black with a little bit of water so it goes on nice and smoothly. And then I've used a nice big brush and really pushed the colour into the canvas, also going around all of the edges so it just gives you a nice complete surface on which to start painting. The black is going to be a little bit scary badgers when you start working because it's going to make all your colours look very different. But if you open yourself up to a bit of chaos, don't be too precise about how you start, then it's going to get you into that mindset of thinking, OK, I'm just going to fly by the seat of my pants and see what happens. I'm working from the photograph, and I'm going to be using a grid in order to help me organise my space. But we're not creating a facsimile of the photograph. What we want to do is bring our own personality into the painting. So we like a little bit of you in there, because otherwise you're just recreating something that already exists. I've gridded up my canvas using chalk, and in this case, it's actually a pastel pencil. I'm also going to grid my photograph using the chalk as well. So I just want to create a light line that goes across in the same way that helps me grid out the photograph. So I'm going to start off just by identifying some large shapes, and that's going to give me my confidence to start zoning in on some of those important areas. So let's just have a look at, we have a little bit of the branch coming through here. And notice my marks are lovely, loose and loopy, no precision here. It's a bit like throwing some raw clay at the canvas. We're going to mould it with paint later. What I also find useful is to start annotating the canvas. So this is my really light area. There's a little bit of sky here. So I'm actually going to write sky to remind myself. And also it helps me to remember, but this is my painting. I'm not doing it for anyone else. This is just mine, and I can mark it and annotate it however I like. So I'm working with acrylic, and acrylic is fast drying, which is its superpower. And I'm going to capitalise on that today by layering up as it dries quickly. But what that also means is that you don't want to bring out too much acrylic at once because it will dry and then you can't use it. So you only want to bring out a little bit at a time. So I'm going to start thinking about what I need for this part of the painting. So I'm going to get some white out. So this is titanium white. Then we're going to get a little bit of blue. This is cobalt blue. This is my favourite blue for skies. It's really good for British skies, actually, that are happy, but a little touch of misery in there. So I really like that blue for skies. Then I'm going to get 2 greens out. So this is green, permanent green mid. Oh, look at that colour. And then I'm going to get some Jenkins green. Then I'm going to get some yellow, which is going to give me lots of lovely lights, and adjust the hue of the greens. Then my absolute favourite colour, which is vivid red-orange. So it's like a rainbow of colours here. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of the white. I'm going to start making my first marks. Oh, this is so exciting. I honestly, I love this bit because look at that on the black. I'm going to take a tiny weeny bit of the blue and I'm going to add the blue into the white to let it mix to give me sky colour. So I'm mixing on the canvas rather than the palette because we want to invite a little bit of chaos, a little bit of belly painting. So we want to relinquish a tiny weeny bit of control and see what happens when we mix it on the canvas. And it makes it really exciting. What you'll probably notice, because we're painting on black, is that the paints are going on a little bit darker. Don't worry, this is expected. And you've just got to keep the faith that this is going to give you some really strong depth and some wonderful lights. As I'm painting towards the edge of my guideline, I know that that indicates that I'm now going to start putting in a little bit of foliage. So I'm going to take a little bit of the exciting green permanent and I'm going to start layering that over the sky so it mixes with the sky. Let me just get a little bit more sky colour. So the acrylic has dried ever so slightly. So I'm just going to take some of the white back into the green. Look at what happens to this green on the black canvas. I mean, it looks jewel-like, it's gorgeous. Whilst that green is still wet, I'm going to develop it a little bit further. I'm going to start adding a little bit of yellow into it. So mixing on the canvas, look at that. I'm using quite a loose brush stroke. I'm letting the marks dance because foliage, particularly in this case, hasn't really got a direction. So I want to keep making sure I angle the brush in lots of different directions. So that gives me a little bit of chaos and movement to the foliage. As you can see here, I'm just beginning to feather in some of the oranges. So the oranges are looking perhaps a little bit dark, a little bit dirty because they're going on the black. And also they're mixing a little bit with the green that I already have on my brush. But I don't care, this is my workout layer. This is experimental. I'm setting down blurry versions of what I'm doing, of what I want to achieve. And with the second and third layers, we're going to start pulling out some of those colours, some of those shapes to make sense of the natural chaos that we see in nature anyway. I'm ready to start getting some of the trees in. So I'm going to use a brown. This is an oxide. It's transparent red oxide. You could use burnt sienna. It's a lovely warm brown. And I love painting trees. I'm not a massive fan of brown. So I'm also going to use blue. I love a blue tree, but the two colours will mix together and give me a whole range of greys. So this blue is anthraquinine blue, but you could use ultramarine. And I'm also going to use the white to bring a little bit of light in where I see it. So as I start to paint the trees, so let's start with the blue. Try and resist painting branches in long sweeping lines because that can flatten the whole perspective of them. So work your way up the branch, keep going back to your palette as you're mixing the colour, a little bit of blue, a little bit of brown, and then this branch is going to start petering out. So I'm just going to twist the brush so I'm using more of the narrow part of the brush and just let that branch wiggle its way off. If you've got the sort of mind that works really well with negative space, you could actually leave the black revealed to describe some of the branches. So I've tried to do that up here. I've left a little bit of a gap between some of the sky, and that's going to allow me to bring in a branch, or I could leave it black because the branches are quite black, so I could use that underpaint to actually describe some of the form in the painting. So the black could be really useful for that. I also quite like it when some of the black comes through around the branches. It gives me that sort of graphic look, a little bit of drama. I love a little bit of drama. I'm following the photograph a little bit more closely over here, and there's these wonderful dark greens. So look at how the Jenkins green almost looks black on the canvas. And look how the bright orange goes really dull as well. So it's going dull for two reasons. One, it's mixing with that lovely inky green. And the other reason, of course, is because it's going onto the black. And this particular orange is very transparent. So paint will have properties within boundaries of very transparent to opaque. So transparent is where you can see through it. So the black is really playing its part with those transparent colours. And the more opaque a colour is, so if I take a little bit of the white to introduce a tiny weeny bit of sky coming through, look at the difference. So we can see how the coverage of an opaque pigment is a lot stronger than a transparent pigment, which really allows the black to come through. And it's a bit like you're mixing with the black. So the black is dry, but the black is coming through the transparent. So to visualize what a color might look like, imagine you just mix it with a little bit of black, and that will help you understand what your transparent colors will look like. Okay, as I get closer to this L, this was a little message from a while ago to myself to remind me that there's light there, because otherwise I can get really into the foliage and forget everything. So this is where this comes into its own. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the photograph, and what I'm describing here with that is an area that's got broken light coming through. So I'm going to continue with a little bit of the green, and then I'm going to really make sure that my brush is clean. So I'm going to use a little bit of paper or wipe it all over yourself. And then I'm going to pick up some sky colour. So because I'm working a small area, I'm actually going to pick up a little bit of white and a little bit of blue at the same time, and then work into the green I've just painted, which has dried a little. So let me just work the green back in, which you'll have to do anyway, because what you're doing is you're working between both the sky colour and the green colour, because we want them to blend. We want to create a soft contrast So let's just develop that edge there. So I'm sort of chasing the edge of the colour, but I've got that lovely light in. Pick up a little bit of the sky colour and then place that into that area, keeping alternating between the foliage colour and the sky colour. But by doing this wet in wet, it means that we've got some lovely soft contrasts that we're really going to capitalise on later. I've noticed I've pushed the hedge in a little bit of a weird direction, so some of the colours aren't quite where they are in the photograph. So stepping back, does it really matter? And I think for me it does. So I've got a big strip of green where I don't really want it. And I'm also noticing that the colours aren't quite doing it for me. So I'm going to take a little bit of the alizarin. So this is a new colour that I'm introducing. So there's going to be a little bit of, oh my God, what's it going to do? So let's put it straight onto the black. Oh, look at that. It looks amazing. So this is a really transparent colour, but look how inky that looks. But I'm using it to correct some areas. So I'm going to paint it over some of these lighter areas. And can you see the difference already? So this really shows the impact of the black as well. I'm going to be working on the foreground now, which is the pathway. So whilst there is foliage on the pathway, there's a different description of texture. So I'm going to change my brushstroke a little bit. Also, the colour is changing, and I love purples in my pathways. It just helps the greens that will dominate the rest of the landscape taste better. I'm going to use some purples, but I'm not going to introduce a purple. I'm going to use some of the colours I already have to create that purple, which is the wonderful alizarin. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that alizarin, apply that in a large-ish space. Just going to apply that over that area. Then I'm going to get a little bit of the blue, the alizarin blue that I use for the branches. I'm going to overlay that. And you can see again how everything is so dark on the black. And of course, that pathway isn't that dark. So I can build the light later, but I may as well start to add a little bit of white in. So as I add the white, you can start to see the blues come alive, the alizarins poke through, some of those lovely purples and greys. That's the first layer done, and already I'm itching to get onto the second layer. So I'm looking at some of the green, thinking I'm going to thin that out. I'm also going to be creating extra contrasts on the second layer and, of course, bringing in the light, because we're now going to be one layer, one step away from the black. So the black is going to lose its influence on the next marks that you make. With the second layer as well, you're going to be doing less mixing on the canvas and more mixing on the palette, because we want a little bit more control, and we're going to be just adding a little bit of paint here and there. And I'm not going to go over everything, but what I am going to do is I'm just going to start feathering in the sky into those areas where the foliage was mixing with the sky colour. I'm twisting my brush around to create a variety of marks, because I want those marks to have an irregularity to them so they look natural, but look at the way that they're cutting into the foliage. So it's beginning to make that foliage look like it ends properly. It's beginning to imply some of the shapes of the leaves. Oh, I love this bit. I totally love this bit. It's magic. It's absolute magic. I've got enough of the foliage up here, I think, at the moment. It's good not to make final decisions until the whole painting has had a second layer. And I do keep referring to it as a second layer, but actually you're doing a little bit of a third layer and a fourth layer as you start to adjust some of the colours and the lights as you go. So I'm coming down here, and what I want to look at now is how I bring this bush here forward. So I'm getting a little bit more of a lighter colour, and just using the photograph as inspiration still, I'm going to start to really increase the contrast. So it's like painting the edges of the bush and making them lighter and really pulling out. Let's get a little bit of white on there. Really pulling out where this bush is situated. So bringing it right to the front. Oh, is that too much? Oh. No, let's just go for it anyway. Once you're on a roll, just go with it, see what happens. Much better than trying to be perfect. So I've tackled the most important parts, the bits that I want to bring out on this painting. And now it's a case of, let's see how it all works together and what are the final little zhuzhy bits that I need to put on just to finish the painting. Now I'm going to step back and think, OK, let's get a few little bits of foliage to just bring this pathway into the painting. I think that's the critical thing here, is just to make those purples and blues feel like they're getting a little love from the foliage. And then I'm as happy as I'm going to be at this stage. I think it's done. So hopefully that's given you an insight into painting on black, and it's excited you enough to get your canvases out, paint them black, and then work on top to create something that's got lots of power and excitement. I've heard it said that black is the thief of light and the thief of colour, and I really love that. And what you're doing is you're actually working against that, and by working against it means you've got to work hard to create excitement and power and contrast to create an amazing landscape.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Amy Jury, took part in Portrait Artist of the Year in 2021, where she first caught our attention with her striking self-portrait.
Definitely a self-portrait in crisis, or it looks like a couple of rounds have been fought.
At the Heat, she painted actress Polly Walker, who chose her portrait to take home.
I love the colours and I love the stuff around the back.
Gives it sort of real energy and vibrancy.
I think it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Amy often creates paintings by using different tones of a single colour, which she will explain in today's masterclass, Monochrome Palette.
Today, I'm going to be taking the idea of a reduced palette one step further by making a monochromatic painting. Monochrome is often thought about as a black and white painting, but it can be any one single colour, and I love painting from vintage photographs, old black and white family photos, so this is a perfect technique to practice tone or as an underpainting or as a finished painting in itself. So in my setup today, I've got my oil painting paper on my easel. The paper's set with my eyeline in the middle of the paper or the canvas, whatever it is that you want to use. And I've got my reference photo right here, so it's easy to glance at. And I've got my palette, my paints, my solvent, my brush, and all the things that I need right close by. It's a good idea to use a dark colour for this because we want to achieve a good range of darks and lights. So that's tone or contrast or shadows. So it's being able to achieve the darkest darks and the lightest lights with just one colour is going to be possible with a dark colour. We're going to be working in thin layers, working up to thicker layers. So I'm going to grab a bit of my solvent. I'm using a non-toxic citrus-based solvent, and I'm going to just add a bit of that into my dark brown mix, adding even more solvent into it to make it nice and thin and runny. So I'm going to use a sponge to apply the paint to the paper. And the reason for that is just it goes on really nice and smoothly and quickly and makes a really nice texture. So I'm going to dip my sponge into just a little bit of solvent just to make sure I've got a nice fluid amount of paint on it. And then I can come to my piece of paper right here. And it's just a question of making a mid-tone coverage, which means not too dark, not too light, just something to get us going to cover the white paper with a light and very thin wash of tone. And you can see this lovely burnt umber colour, this lovely brown colour. It's got a slight reddishness to it, so it's quite lovely and warm. And the sponge just immediately does the job of rubbing the paint, the pigment into the surface, but the white paper is doing all the work. And one thing that you want to remember is that nothing's ever going to be as white as the white of the paper. Let that paper do the work for you and to make that glow of the paint. I'm also not going to go right up to the edges of the paper. There's something I quite like about an unfinished edge and an unfinished painting, so it's quite nice to see these rough edges around the edge. So I've rubbed that all in now. And now I'm going to start thinking about the actual composition that I'm going to use today. Now, I'm using an old family photograph. This is a wonderful photograph of my husband's grandmother. And I love this photograph because I really enjoy using references that are slightly caught in between. They're not posed photographs. Quite often when you find old family photographs, people are staring straight at the camera, they've got a big smile on, and that's gorgeous, but I like those little moments in between where people are a bit caught off guard and maybe not posing so much. And this is a great example of this. She's hanging out some washing in her back garden in Scotland. She's got a gorgeous little cheeky glint in her eye, and I love the shadows and the tones in this picture. This is something quite lovely about using old photographs. You know, they're often taken on lovely sunny days. You get these very strong shadows, these strong contrasts. You've got the sunshine hitting this lovely white sheet and this big dramatic dark shadow falling underneath her arm. So for me, this is a great reference photo with lots going on and lots to play with. The way that I might start thinking about the figure, you could draw an outline. I could spend ages gridding it up and getting everything in the right place. But I don't think I'm going to do that today. I'm going to go for a freehand approach because I don't really need it to be super accurate or absolutely the same as a photograph. I'm going to get a kind of impression of what's happening here. So one way that I quite like to work is to work almost from the inside out. So instead of trying to draw an outline and kind of fill it in, which might be a way to work for some things, how about if you painted from the inside out? So almost like painting the middle of the head. Yeah, and I'm using quite a dark, but still a very thin mix of paint, okay? So we're still working with thin all the time until we're more confident and we're getting to the later stages when we'll go a bit thicker. So all I'm thinking about is the angle of this head, slightly tilted, and I'm just trying to get the overall shape of the head. And I can see that that head is going right to the top of the page, so I better go up a bit there, and the hair's coming down here. So let's have a look. That's roughly where the head is. And I'll keep going down through the body. And so that's roughly the figure And I'm just going to find out where the washing line is. It's right up here. And also with working from old photographs, you do have the license to leave in what you want to leave in and take out what you want to take out. You don't have to paint everything. You don't want to paint it, don't paint it. So now I'm going to start trying to define the figure just a little bit more with some darker tones. So I'm getting a little bit more paint on the brush. It's not as thin as it was before. And I'm going to just start popping in a few darkish tones. I'm not going for full dark yet, but just so I can see where things are. I'm looking for this very particular angle, the way her head is tilted. That's always very important, I find, in portraiture and in figure painting, is the angle of the head says an awful lot. And oftentimes our brain tries to switch the face round to looking directly at you, so everything is symmetrical. And you've got to observe very closely about what is actually happening and look at this angle of the head tilted to the side, and that will say a lot about the gesture of the look. So I'm looking at this angle, and I'm just trying to get it in, and I can start like finding out where this lovely dark hair, this beautiful dark bob is, and that's going to describe a lot about how the head is placed. And let's see if I can see where the features will be. I've got an eye around here. And as ever, thinking about the face as a mixture of shapes that need to be put together rather than drawing in any detail. And because we're using this old, quite blurry photograph, that's quite helpful actually, because it immediately breaks things down into general shapes rather than fine detail. So I can just put these shapes in right now, and then I can find the detail a bit later. Okay, so I've made some more defining marks now, so I've got a rough idea of where things are. And now I'm going to start to take away some paint, so subtracting, so finding the light. So it's about thinking in negative almost. So you're not trying to put in the dark shapes, we're trying to take away the light shapes. And we're going to do that with a variety of tools. I'm going to start with just a piece of cloth. Now this could be a bit of sheet material or a bit of old t-shirt. People can use all sorts of things. Yeah, a bit of kitchen towel works really well as well. So you just have to wrap a bit around your finger, and then we're going to start wiping away some of those lights. Let me show you what I mean. So hopefully it will work. So here we go, yeah. So just by doing that, you really take away a lot of that paint and start to have that feeling of light hitting the side of a face. And you've got that beautiful glow back of the paper, which we found in the beginning by having the translucent pigment over the white paper. So we're really going to use that to our advantage. It's really great for skin tones, to make beautiful glowing skin tones, to take away the paint rather than adding it on. So I'm just going to do some rough marks where I feel like the light is. Now, what I might do next is to achieve even more contrast and more tone, we can actually use the solvent to our advantage with this technique as well. So the solvent will take away even more of the brown paint. So if I just dip this bit of rag into the solvent here, and let's see if that works. So I'm going to look at this collar here, which is this little hint of white. Let's see if we can get even brighter here. And get a clean bit of rag there, and yeah, so it's even brighter where I've used the solvent. So you can use the solvent to your advantage in claiming back that lovely glint of sunlight coming onto the face. There's other tools that you could use for this. These kind of beauty blenders are quite nice, little soft sponges you can use. Also, your good old cotton bud for the fine detail might work. So you can dip it in a bit of solvent and then hopefully, with a bit of pressure, we can start to define some of these more particular edges. And tiny little details like round the eyes. Now I'm going to go back into the darks again. So I've taken away the lights and I'm going to concentrate more on getting those lovely contrasts. Our eyes are really drawn to contrast. We love to see difference in art and in the world. You know, it's what we're really attracted to. So I'm always very interested in finding those dark tones against the light tones. And this photograph's got a lot of that going on here with her beautiful dark hair and these really strong shadows. So we're going to go back in and find those a bit more now. So this time, we're working with a bit thicker paint. So the paint is not as mixed with the solvent anymore. So there's much more paint on my brush. And actually, this is quite a good point to maybe switch brushes. The synthetic brush sometimes can have a tendency with this technique to start lifting the paint off, and I can show you how that could be for our advantage in a little while. But I wonder if we switch to another brush, a bristle brush. It's a bit different from the synthetic brush because it's much scratchier and it actually holds paint in a different way. It really clings to the paint. So it's a lovely brush for really getting some big globs of paint on and just laying it down quite thickly. It will make it stick to the page much better. I'm putting in some of these dark tones and you can see how that's really nice, picking up against those mid and light tones that we've already established. Let's go under the sleeve here. So I'm really working with not only the concept of dark and light, but we're also working with thick and thin, which is a wonderful thing in a painting. When you see a painting in real life, not just on a screen, but in real life, you really enjoy those textures that you see on the painting. That's why it's lovely going to galleries and seeing painting in real life, because something about the texture and the thickness of paint gives a certain type of enjoyment and joy. So really embrace the qualities of the paint and really be generous with yourself as well. Use that paint that you've got, yeah? Don't feel stingy with it. It's what it's for. It's for putting on paper and for playing with. So you can have these lovely raised edges. And you can see how the thickness of the paint made such a difference here. It's the same colour paint that we started with, but it's just the thickness that's making this difference in tone for us here. So I'm just going to use my smaller brush now to do some of the finer details in the face. But again, I'm looking for the expression of the shapes of the face. I always think with eyes, the eye socket is more important than the eye itself. And when we've got an image like this where I can't see fine detail, this is great because I can try and describe the way that the eye sits in a socket back in the head rather than eyelashes or fine detail. So let's have a look at this dark shape here. She's kind of squinting in the sun. And then this little curve here of where the nose curves into the eye receding away is always really important to look at that little curve. There's some things in faces that I find really useful to anchor my painting with, and this is one of them, the curve of the nose into the eyebrow, especially when the face is slightly turned away. Okay, I might try now as well to put in some of these lovely stripes on her jumper. And I'm going to do that with one of my little flat synthetic brushes dipped in solvent. Now this should do the job of taking the paint off again. So it's just a brush with no paint on it. And I'm going to just use it to see if I can create some of those lovely stripes on her jumper. So let's have a look. So it's kind of putting them on and taking them off again. It's quite interesting, actually. I didn't really know it was going to do that. So as it's cutting into the dark paint, it's taking it off. And then when I'm putting it back up to the light areas, it's putting it on again. It's quite a nice technique. I mean, I didn't really expect that to happen. But this is what's quite nice about this technique. You can let these little funny accidents happen and just embrace them. So what I'm doing is not a faithful representation of this cardigan. It's almost like a graphic motif that's happening. So now we've got our monochrome set up, our dark brown painting. I am actually going to break the rules a little bit, and I'm going to start to add a little touch of colour just for fun. And I think I might start with a little bit of red to warm up the face, just a little bit of pink in the cheeks. See how it goes. We can always take it away again if it doesn't work. So I'm going to grab my red, squeeze a bit out. Don't need much. I'm going to use the very smallest amount and probably take most of it away again. And I'm going to grab my small brush, and I'm honestly just getting the little smudges of red on it. It's barely there. And let's go in and find the cheek and see how red that's going to be. It's very subtle, actually. It's very light. I might just go in just a tiny bit darker, but I'll mix it with a bit of the brown. And when I mix it with the brown, this makes it harmonious with the brown. So I'm just keeping with that one colour, but I'm warming up the brown with the red, is what I'm going to say. So it's still, hopefully, technically a one-colour painting, but I'm just slightly adjusting the temperature of that brown. There we go, it's a little bit stronger now. And I'm going to put a bit of the pinkish brown into the hands as well, up here. I can't really see what the hands are doing here. They're a bit obscured by this giant peg, so I'm not really going to define them very much. I'm just going to have a general impression of the hands moving off, doing a bit of pinning up of washing there. So I'm putting on colour, and then I'm almost like taking it off by smushing it around. Get my bit of rag. Rub it in, and again, you're going to get that beautiful glow of the paper coming through the colour and creating that lovely pinkish tone. I'm going to show you a technique that the Impressionists would have used, which is working with brown and blue to create a black colour. So I've got my brown, and I'm going to add a little bit of dark blue in with it, whatever blue that you've got. And once you mix it together on the palette, you'll see it creates a really nice inky blackish colour. I'm going to try and frame the face with a thick amount. So remember, we're working with that texture to create this nice raised edge, and it's going to pick out the side of the face with that lovely bluish brown inky colour. And thickness creates the texture, which also catches the light as you're looking at the painting and creates that lovely interest. So I've put in some more of those dramatic darks now, and I think I might push this painting on just a little bit further. So I'm loving the white sheet that she's got behind her, and I'm thinking of mixing up some white and actually painting in the white sheet behind her. So let's give it a go. So I'm just squeezing the white paint onto my palette, and I think for quite a dramatic light tone, I'm going to need to use quite a thick amount of paint. It's not going to be a thin wash, it's going to be fairly thick. I think I might add the tiniest little bit of blue. So I'm going to grab a clean brush, and I'm going to grab a little bit of blue on the brush, the tiniest bit, you can hardly see it. I generally just like to always do something to the white, not use it straight from the tube. Just to either cool it down slightly with a blue, or to warm it up slightly, maybe with a red or a brown or a yellow. It's just something that I find makes a little bit more of an interesting colour. And let's see, what this does as well is it helps to pick out the figure. The figure pops out a little bit more with this kind of brightness behind it. So, for instance, let's go straight for this face here and add this lovely bluish white in. And what you can see happening now as well is the paint is kind of breaking apart across the surface of the paper. This is called scumbling, where you've got quite thick paint and you drag it across the surface and it breaks up and you can see the colour underneath showing through. It's quite subtle, but it's one of those other extra parts of interest and enjoyment in looking at painting is when you see these kind of details and colours existing underneath other colours. So you can see that's quite a nice way to suddenly have the figure coming forwards. I've painted in this sheet now with this bluish-white colour, and I feel like that's really brought the figure forward and given it a bit of fresh life, so I'm quite enjoying that. I'm going to put in a little bit of the same colour on the collar and maybe, yeah, these little details here, just to have a bit of fun with these elements. Now I'm just wondering, is it finished? It definitely could be, but I might push it just that one step further. And I think I might work into this area here, which in the photograph is a brick wall, but I'm going to make it as some sky. So we're kind of still sticking with the monochrome brown colour range, but I have introduced a tiny bit of blue now, haven't I, in the hair and in the sheet. And I'm going to make the sky maybe a bit blue behind them, and hopefully that'll keep a kind of unified colour scheme. So I've got mainly kind of browns and mainly kind of blues. So I think I'm finished now. We started off by using one colour, and we started to break the rules and introduce other colours into the mix. And I've had a lovely time looking at this beautiful photograph of Emma. And I'd love you to try the same. Maybe you could work from an old family photograph and try the limited monochrome palette yourself.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Curtis Holder, first impressed on Portrait Artist of the Year with his striking drawing of the iconic late drag queen, the Vivienne.
It's scratchy and it's rough and it's energetic. It's like a little piece of magic.
At the semi-final, his remarkable portrait of award-winning author Bernardine Evaristo amazed the sitter and earned him a place in the final three.
Wow. They'd almost look like scribbles, but actually I'm emerging through them.
And his commissioned piece of partner Steve and pet dog Freddie, along with his drawing of actor and author Eddie Izzard, saw him crowned Portrait Artist of the Year 2020.
Curtis Holder.
I feel a lot of things. It's quite overwhelming. I don't understand how this...
For his winning commission, Curtis drew dancer and director of the Birmingham Royal Ballet, Carlos Acosta, for the Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery.
I can't wait any longer.
Let's do it.
Wow.
Wow. Thank you.
Curtis primarily works with pencils to create his large-scale portraits, and he'll be sharing the secrets to making them work with his masterclass, Drawing with Coloured Pencils.
I'm going to show you how to produce an in-depth portrait to create a sense of mood and atmosphere in a medium that I love, which is, of course, coloured pencil. The type of pencil I'm using is a light-fast pencil. Now, I use this because the colour is guaranteed to stay true in museum conditions, and that's important to me because my work it may well go off to a gallery or museum. Okay, I think I'm ready to go. I've got my paper, I've got my pencils, my chosen medium, and I've got my model. Jarvis, you're looking great.
Thank you.
So I think we are set. Okay. Now, because I'm going to ask you to keep relatively still for a longer period of time, maybe about 10 minutes, I have a timer. Now, this time is going to be for you. It's about 10 minutes. Not only is it a timer, but it also acts as something for you to look at and give your focus to. So get in a really comfortable position. It can be any position you want, because looking at that, your focus is going to be on that. It's not going to be on me. Ready?
Yes, ready.
Okay, let's have a look. I like the shape that you're making. Start at the top of your head and working through that elbow, that left elbow, and then out through that hand. So I'm going to put the top of the head there, and I'm going to say that maybe the bottom of the head's going to be there. And at the moment, they're just lines, straight lines. Really simple shapes. And with pencil, and the way I use pencil, it's better to go from really simple shapes to more complicated shapes. But start simple. Right, now I've got the basic, very basic shape of where things are going. So now I've got all of that in place. What I want to do is I want to get my proportional dividers. That's a way for me to check that I have got the proportions correct. So the way I would use these is I would extend my arm, close one eye, and a look at that shape, the distance. At the moment, I'm measuring the width of Jarvis's head. Now, with these proportions, oh, wow. Oh, my God. Well, that never happens. I've got the size I want. So I've roughly plotted in the size, the width of the head that I want, and that's measured by these 2 points here. And then I've put those smaller points, I'm measuring them against Jarvis's head, and they're the same. So that point there on Jarvis's face is equivalent to that. So now I know that I've got that right, then I can measure everything else off that. Whenever I create any kind of drawing, I will always start with preliminary drawings that I have done showing different techniques and ways of drawing just to loosen me up and to understand what I want the final drawing to look like. It's a way of clarifying proportion and composition, as well as getting to know my sitter. So I've done all of those things before I get here, and this is now where I really try to nail the drawing that I want.
Can't lie, I think I'm gonna have to move my hand.
That's
That's
okay.
all right. Is this position good?
That position is fine, and I think it's brilliant that Jarvis has said this now because we're at the planning stage of the drawing. So let's just remeasure where that hand is. So I'm now looking at where that wrist is. And what's brilliant about wearing this jacket, it gives you a very clear definition of where those joints are. So that's really helpful for me. So what I'm doing now, I'm putting in quite large structural lines to show edges of what I can see. And measuring is kind of like putting a jigsaw together. After I've done the overall shape of what I'm looking at, I'll go in and usually I'll get the eye line in. I know that it's usually halfway down the head. Once I've got that in, I'll usually measure one eye width and pop it in where I think it should go. And then once I've got that width, I'll use that as a guide to compare and measure other lengths, other measurements. Are you okay? Do you want a little break? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's give our model a little break. And that's why I love that timer, because if I forget to break, the model can see exactly when they need to stop. And also remember to have a little stretch yourself, because you'll seize up as well, because you're in the same position. What we are going to do now is, after all, we've got the basic structure in. So now, instead of looking for the most obvious structural details, like the top of the head, where the chin is, where the shoulder is, where the zip is, what I'm going to do is home in on basic shadow shapes. So the shapes, if I squint and look at my model, I will see certain shapes in the face and on the neck and on the clothing where the line of each thing isn't so obvious. For example, where we see the edge of the collar, I can see the point of that collar because the sheen of the jacket is a highlight which makes that area look really light against this fur. And it's creating this shape that then just kind of melts into the jacket. So really, if I squint, it's really difficult for me to see the edge of the collar. I know I've drawn it in here, but actually it's really difficult for me to see the edge of the collar. And so I'm going to draw that shape as just one shape and work out that detail later. Okay, we've got the main structure of this portrait down. Things are more or less in the right place. So really what I was going for were the big shapes that make up the whole of what I'm looking at. And once those are in place, now's the time to start looking at more detail, but not too much detail. So what I'm going to be looking for now are shadow shapes. And those are the shapes that you see if you kind of squint. And now, if I'm squinting and looking at Jarvis, what I can see is the brightest bit of his face is this highlight on his cheekbone. And that's because, really, it's closest to the light source. So I'm going to really lightly put that shape in. And don't be alarmed that it's a weird shape in a weird place. It will make sense as you're creating this drawing. Now, that's the lightest part of his face. And then I can see from that a shadow shape that falls under his eye socket just there, which actually highlights the shape of the nose and where the light is hitting the side of his nose. That's like a triangle. And finding these shadow shapes really helps describe the face more accurately. But what I can see, again, drawing, painting, whatever you're doing, it's an exercise in looking and adjusting, constantly looking and adjusting. And that's why it's a good idea to go in light, especially with pencil, to go in quite lightly at first and then build up the layers. It's better to have a light touch. And look at where I'm holding my pencil. It's right at the end. So the lines I'm making are way more fluid and easy and just light. Right, I've got to a stage now where I've pulled out shadow shapes enough for me to see, and I've worked into the darker areas as much as I can with this single colour. So I think it's about time that I mix up my colour palette a bit and start to go a bit darker and work on another layer which emphasises those shadow shapes, but with darker crowns. And I think I've got a range of browns and purples. So we're still staying with the reds, but we're bringing in something a bit more complex and a bit more towards the skin tone of our model. I'm going to start with what I perceive as the darkest areas, which are the eye sockets. So I'm constantly squinting and looking for shape. The gradual build-up of tone isn't as obvious as you may want it to be, but trust in the process, be patient, keep layering, and it will appear gradually. Right. What I'm starting to do now is, as well as going into the darker areas and slowly layering up and intensifying that colour, I'm also starting to use a finer and darker line to really accentuate the darkest dark areas. So where the lips meet, that centre line, trying to put that in. And then the areas of the nostrils and the area of the eye socket. So to build up that area of tone, you'll notice that the lines that I'm making are shorter and more intense. They're closer together, which helps with the build-up of colour. So obviously his hair is brilliant because the way it's plaited is giving us an idea of volume, because where the plaits are separated gives us a very faint line which describes the scalp. So whenever you see anything like this that describes the shape and volume of the head, just use it. The pencil marks that I'm using here are a little bit of descriptive plait work. So I'm not really drawing an exact shape, but I am varying my line slightly just to give and add a suggestion of the texture of the hair, which, if you look closely, gets quite dense towards the center of each plait and then fades out. What I'm starting to do now is define certain lines, define certain areas, just to pull everything together. And I'm gonna start using my pencil in a slightly different way, in a way that I would call script, as if you were writing, because holding your pencil like this and further down gives you more control and allows you to make darker lines because you can press on a little heavier. And those bits for me on Jarvis are the line between his resting hand and the neck, because the neck is in darkness and semi-darkness. However, his hand, the plane of that palm, the lower palm, is kind of bathed in light. If I squint, it's probably one of the lightest patches on this drawing. And so if I don't feel it's been described through tone, then I'm going to use a line. But I'm not going to over-egg this pudding. But it does mean I need to get it as spot on as I can. If I was going to use a highlight on this drawing, it would be right at the edge of that cheekbone, right there. And what I've got is a precision eraser. Now, these come in many shapes, forms, but I love using this because the point is really small and I don't have to rub, I just press a button, which means I'm a little bit lazy. But if you don't have one of these, another trick is to get any rubber. Let's have a look. Any rubber like this, any old rubber, just one you like anyway, and slice it with a craft knife until it gives you a sharp edge. And you can use that, it's just as good. But I'm just being a bit posh, so don't mind me. So let's see if I can pop in a highlight. I reckon we're almost done for today. You've been absolutely brilliant. Yeah, let's just finish off there. Do you want to see it?
I'm ready.
You say that now. Okay, there we go.
Oh my God. I don't even know what to say. Like, I've never seen a portrait of me or of anyone even like that. Like, that's actually amazing.
Thank you very much. Now, this drawing, I feel, has come to its conclusion. I hope, if anything, today, I've inspired you to just give it a go and just create something new, but this time with some coloured pencils.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor is artist and leathersmith Brogan Bertie, who won his heat on Portrait Artist of the Year with an exciting interpretation of actor and dancer Leighton Williams.
What Brogan captures is attitude.
Yes, it does play on the likeness of persona rather than likeness on the day. But what a yummy, beautiful bit of painting.
At the semi-final, his striking depiction of Jolie Richardson secured his place in the last round of the competition.
There is so much about this picture that really works for me. The hand on the chest, the cheekbones is completely compelling.
His final double portrait of acting couple Andy Serkis and Lorraine Ashbourne, alongside his powerful commission painting of partner Steph, saw him take the title of Portrait Artist of the Year 2024.
I can't describe how I'm feeling. I can't, it's not gone anywhere. I haven't digested it at all. I feel incredible. I feel mind blown.
For his winning £10,000 commission for the National Galleries of Scotland, Brogan painted award-winning broadcaster Lorraine Kelly.
I'm going to do an oil sketch, something much looser than I'd do for the final thing.
Good, you're clever.
Who was moved to tears by the final portrait.
Should we have a look?
You've got me. Sorry, I'm crying, but that is absolutely gorgeous.
Brogan is a master at capturing his sitters' essence through their body language, and hands play a significant role in his compositions, making him the perfect guide for today's masterclass, Painting Hands.
I think hands are something that can be quite daunting for a lot of people, and people tend to avoid them. And I think it's just so worth having a shot at hands. So what I'm going to try and do today is simplify the process down, demystify it, and give you kind of a step-by-step where you can paint some really juicy, gorgeous hands to add a bit of life and a bit of body language to a portrait. I'm going to do a study of a close-up of Kemi's hands here, so we're going to do it from life. And so what we need to do first is to set the hands up. And yes, that would be amazing if you can take that off, because I want to get the whole hands. What we're going to talk about is really the planes of the hands and how we can see shapes. So I want to see the whole hands. Sometimes it can be really fun to paint rings and sleeves and everything, but I think for now, that's beautiful. That looks really good, actually. Is that comfortable? Mm-hmm. You're happy? Okay, amazing. So we're going quite small today. I'm doing this on gessoed panel, so everything's smooth and beautiful and sits on top the way that I usually work. And I'm mixing some burnt umber, some soft white, and I'm going to use some liquid to mix a really juicy, transparent colour to do my sketch with. That's a beautiful pose. Kemi very helpfully has sleeves, which give us a nice reference for where to cut the hands off, where to start the hands. So I'll start with painting the sleeves and look at where they are in reference to each other. Really, at this sketch phase, what I want to do is to kind of not look at them like hands. I think when we think about hands, there's so much detail, there's so much proportion, there's so many fingers, there's so many fingernails, it's all very confusing and overwhelming. So what I want to do is really simplify it down into bigger shapes, more abstract shapes, and focus on the big picture. So firstly, where the hands intersect, I've basically got two shapes. So I'm going to do the first hand with the wrist here and the knuckles like that. If I look at the outline of the hand, it's a funny little shell shape. So I'm gonna not think about what I think hands should look like and how I think fingers should sit. I'm actually gonna completely abstract it and create this weird conch kind of shape. And that's our first hand. I've ignored the thumb on Kemi's other hand because I don't need that information yet. That's not important to me. I'm looking at the big picture, the big shape. And I can bring that thumb in later. But it's more important that I get the big picture right. It's so easy to get distracted by everything else. And what I've noticed is that that hand is much lower, that second hand I'm painting, their wrist is much lower than the other one. And see, my brain started to fill in what I thought that should look like. And you just have to always double check and make sure your brain isn't making assumptions and filling in the gaps. What I really love about this really transparent kind of gloopy mix of the liquid and this paint is when I've gone too high or I need to adjust something, it's really easy on this really smooth panel to just correct, and all of that will be painted over. Like, don't be precious about that. But that helps me with the sketchy nature of this first step of the process. At this stage, I like to separate the hands into 3 planes because it makes it easier to simplify the whole process. You've got the flat plane of your hand, the back of your palm there, that first bit of your fingers, and then the second bend of your fingers. And that's usually how a hand separates and bends. The top, we don't need to worry about that much. It usually all moves together. But these planes all tend to capture different bits of light. One tends to be in shadow, if you can see like that, or that bit's in light. That's what helps us to break up into more abstract shapes. Then I'm just going to put a vague gesture of the sleeves in. They're not important during this study, but still we always talk about hands in how they interact with everything else of the body. So sitting in the cradle of Kemi's dress there, that all helps to ground the hands, make them feel more real, make them feel tangible. When I see a painting, I want to see the weight of the hands, and that helps me connect to the sitter. So that's really important. But for now, I'll just do a gesture at that. And then I'm going to go into the detail of the hands, which, when we look at Kemi's hands, even though we know there are 4 knuckles, we can only see 2. So I can't see Kemi's pinky finger. I'm not going to add it in. I'm not going to suggest that there should be 4 digits that we can see. Like, this is how the hands look, and I'm going to follow exactly what I can see, which is 2 knuckles, and then their thumb coming up out of here. So in this sketch, to indicate some shadow, I've just filled that in with this liquidy mixture, because I'll go over that later. But just for now, for clarity, you can see exactly where that shadow is going and how it indicates that the hand is bending, that that's a different plane. So our light source is coming from here. So similarly, the back of Kemi's hand is also in shadow. So I'll do the same thing. And in sketches like this, when I've gone a bit messy and I understand what that first layer says, I put a little bit more of my burnt umber into the mix. So we get a slightly darker sketch layer, which gives us a bit of clarity while we're working on this. You see, if that goes on, that's a little bit darker. And I'm just going to use that to keep carving out exactly what I want to see in Kemi's hands. So at this phase, it looks very messy, but don't be afraid of the ugly duckling phase. What you're getting down is a lot of information. You need to be loose with your sketch. You need to allow it to go through this phase. And that's why I'm using this slightly darker mix in order to just clarify some of the things that might get lost in your sketch or that you need to just make sharper as you go in. But I know that these messy bits are my shadows, and that just helps me to understand where the bends have to be. So if the shadow's there, that's where the bend of their knuckles needs to be. Usually, something that's really helpful with hands is that there's a V at the top of our fingers, which is where they slope upwards into the middle finger, which is usually the tallest one. And that V helps us to shape the fingers in proportion to each other when they're on our model. So I can see on Kemi's that their index finger slopes right into their middle finger, which here gives me that neat V there and lets me get everything right in proportion to each other. So I'm ready to move on to blocking in now. We literally only need this sketch to start with, in my opinion, because what I'm going to do with the blocking in is to fine-tune the boundaries of Kemi's hand, and that will help us carve out the shape and kind of rectify anything that we're not certain of. And I find that easier to do in the process while I'm working with colour, while I'm blocking in. So I'm going to go straight into their dress. And that's going to help me because that's all of the space around the hands. So what I'm doing is isolating and kind of confirming the shapes that I've used. So even doing that there, I think the section from their wrist to the edge of their thumb, I've done it too big. So to notice that, I've just used a negative space and I'm gonna just rectify, carve that in, make that a straighter line and a longer line to then the edge of their other thumb. Which in comparison is really a curve. Where the other hand is angular, that's a curve. And this is why, really, a lot of this process comes from painting itself rather than the sketch, because it's so much easier to see while you're doing it and while you're self-correcting the whole time, which is why I love using the liquid as well, because everything stays malleable and stays juicy and you're able to push things around. It's not corrective like you have to take things away, but you just push and carve and sculpt. And that's why I love this blocking in stage. I've gone in with a kind of French ultramarine-y colour. Their dress has a lot of colours in it, and I'm not focused on that while I'm doing this study of the hands. So I'm just going to create a vague, kind of darker backdrop on which their hands can sit. But I'm not fussed about the detail yet. I'm starting to add some colour into the planes that we divided, and we've started off here with the way Kemi's fingers curl round. So that end plane of their fingers is quite dark. I'm going to go in now and do the same for this side, where the back of their palm is in shadow. And just blocking off these big sections is going to help me to see the structure overall, and then I can finesse those little details as it develops. What I would say is, don't be nervous of this stage, because you can correct everything that happens here. This is all to just to gather an idea of what it looks like and how it's going to come together. in the final painting. There's a lot of editing to do if you need to and if you want to. So you have to keep letting these steps happen as they happen. This filling in stage, when there's no real grounding, there's no real detail, it might be quite hard to see, to imagine, to project yourself into a future where this is done. But it all comes together. I'm using hog hair brushes, the same that I always use. They're rough, quite stiff brushes, which means when I do put the paint down, we get these gorgeous brush marks that you can see really distinct bristles, and I really love that style. And I really like how it helps the paint to go onto the panel. I've gone smaller for these panels because I want a little bit more control over the defined planes of the hand. And then I will go smaller again for doing the darks and the small details, the fingernails maybe. We come up against this idea that you start big, bigger brushes, bigger brush strokes, and we go smaller and smaller and smaller. It's almost like we have to do all of that big work to find the detail. So we really have to earn our right to use a small brush. Hands feature so heavily in my portraits. I think I see hands as a real tool to connect to the sitter and to connect to the subject of the portrait. They're so human, like that's the way we connect to other people is, you know, by shaking a hand or holding someone's hand. And I just think having hands present in a portrait is such a vehicle for inviting the viewer to see that this is a person, this is a human person. We can imagine very easily the act of holding someone's hand. And I think it just invites an intimacy that I really value in my portraits and really value in other people's portraits. I just find them such a deep connection to other people that I can't do a portrait of someone. I can very rarely do a portrait of someone without including their hands because it, for some reason, is kind of my first entrance into a person. I think sometimes the mistake with hands can be treating all the fingers like separate digits or the hand as kind of a weird higgledy-piggledy amalgamation of like so many fingers. And I actually think it's really helpful and kind of beautiful to imagine that actually the hand always is in, you know, tandem with itself. It's always moving together. And sometimes, rather than, you know, thinking that you're going to be so technical and do every single finger and every single knuckle, allow the hand to, like, fall into itself, you know? That sometimes these fingers, if they're sitting together on someone's lap, they'll look like just a swoop of colour. You can kind of see in Kemi's, even with the sketch that I've done, that these fingers here on the bottom are kind of falling into each other. You can see that there's not a lot of, because there's, you know, not much at all at the moment, but even as I finish, I might not put so much distinction between those two fingers, because I think I've grouped them together. There's something quite strong in allowing the things that fall together naturally to fall together naturally. So now that I've got these vague shapes and it's all a strange mess, I'm gonna go in and try to distinguish the detail. So immediately, I want to get this dark shadow in where Kemi's thumb meets their other hand, because that's all very dark in there. And to me, the dark looks quite blue, so I'm gonna go in with a blue under there. And this is a really satisfying part of the process, that you begin to see the real shape and everything stops looking like such a mess and stops looking like it's all running into each other. This is the really lovely bit where you carve out the details that you've set the groundwork for. So I've started to place the fingernails, just very roughly. And with more time, you'd go in and you'd do loads of detail on these nails, however much you wanted. But I'm just going in because the fingernails are a great way of informing the direction of the fingers. They kind of give us a little one-up to be able to see exactly where it's going. So this thumbnail is going down, and that just gives us a bit of structure to the hand, which is really useful. So I think for now, I'm happy to leave the sketch there. You can see where I've started to bring in some more detail, but it's still quite loose and quite rough. I used the kind of burnt umber, quite a dark foundation, and then as I go on, I'll just pick more and more colours out that I can see, like the blue of the highlights, the pink of their palm. I think as you go on through the process, they're the really exciting bits. As you find the detail, you can just add more and more colour, and that's what I really love. So hopefully that has demystified the process of painting hands, and you feel a little bit emboldened and a little bit excited to try it yourself. I'd really encourage you to do a study like this, and then hopefully go on to the next step, which will be including hands in a bigger portrait.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Lorna May Wadsworth, took part in Portrait Artist of the Year in 2024, painting boxing champion Ricky Hatton, who thought the portrait was a knockout.
A direct gaze right at us. Again, intense.
Yeah, it's scaring me, that. It's a fantastic piece.
And chose it to take home.
Everyone's about it. You've all done me proud, but I have to say Lorna.
Well done, Lorna.
Lorna works in an array of mediums, but has a particular passion for all that glitters, making her the perfect tutor for today's masterclass, Painting with Gold Leaf.
I'm really excited to be sharing a technique with you today, which is gilding and using gold leaf within your artworks. I want to demonstrate and show you how it's not as scary and intimidating as you might think it is, and that it's actually quite a lovely and easy way to bring an element of light and pizzazz into your work. So today, I'm fortunate enough to have a model with me, Jamel, who I'm going to be producing a portrait of in oils. But first of all, I'm going to do some gilding on my round panel, which is going to create a kind of halo effect around his head and really, really make the composition vibrant and him stand out. I'm working on a round panel, which is traditionally called a tondo, and they were used a lot in the early Renaissance. I just think they look really cool. What I've done is I've already put the glue on. It's called Size for gold, and it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to achieve the right level of tackiness, which you want when you lay your gold on. So it's almost like sellotape. And then you have a 3-hour window. It's called open, so it's open for that amount of time. And so you've got to get your work done within that time, otherwise it will dry. So there are two types of gold leaf. There's loose leaf, which is this kind of scary kind that you need to pick up with friction and cotton wool balls. And then there's this kind, which I shall be demonstrating for you today, which is transfer gold leaf. So it's backed onto tissue paper with this space around it so that you can pick it up and manoeuvre it and then flip it over and put it on your support when the size has reached the right level of tackiness. So let me have a go with the first one. So I will line it up so that it's horizontal, I think, because you can see, because these little sheets of gold, they come about 8 centimetres. You can see the kind of where they join. So bear that in mind when you start to lay it on, if you want to lay it on so that it's kind of diagonal or straight. So you've seen me just flip it over and then with the pad of my finger, just rub on the back, and that is transferring the gold to the glue. And then the moment of truth comes when you pick up and look. Where the glue is, it's coming off. And then that's from the edge where it wasn't needed. Now I tend to keep those bits, put that on the side, because there'll be little tiny areas that come up that you might not want to use a whole sheet on. So here we go, the next one. Let's put that. So I started off where there was the kind of the thickest part of gold rather than starting at an edge, because I tend to want to make the gold go as far as possible. So I find if I go where the most of the square will be used, then that helps me do that, because it's not as expensive as you'd think, the packs of gold leaf, but it is, you know, for a special project, but it is worth making sure that you don't waste it. So that's going on quite well. Another little hint is the tissue can get stuck to the glue at the edges, and be very gentle to tease them off, because you don't want that paper to tear and get stuck in the glue. So here we go. So you can turn the panel around to bring it to you and just keep going, really. It's quite satisfying. So for this picture, I'm using a classic yellow gold, 23 carat gold leaf. Look, I'm just turning this around and using that same piece for this corner here. But they actually do gold in different shades. One shade that I like to use a lot is called moon gold, which is a bit more silvery, but it doesn't tarnish like silver would, because it's still high enough carat. So, and there's green gold. So, yeah, depending on the tones and the colours of the painting that you want to make, you can choose gold to work with that. In order to work out which bit I was going to gild before the painting, I needed to work out exactly the negative space. That is the space that I'm gilding, the space around Jamal's head. And I couldn't leave that to chance. So what I did is I got him to send me a photograph of himself straight on, and used that in order to create the outline and the plan of the painting, so that when I go to paint him, everything's in the right place. So you might wonder why I'm doing the gold now and not at the end of the painting. Well, I have primed the board with this lovely fluorescent pink colour, and I've used an acrylic, because if I'd used an oil paint, then the gold is likely to stick to the paint and not just the area where you want the gold to go, where you've put the size. So by doing it now, it means that I can get the gold exactly where I want it. If I was doing it afterwards with an oil painting, if you want to go and put gold on at the end after an oil painting, when you finished it, you can do, but if I were you, I would make a stencil cutout to cover the areas where you don't want the gold to go. So sometimes when you're putting it on, it's going on really, really well today, but sometimes when I pick it up, some bits will stay on the paper. there's one tiny bit there that I can see hasn't come off. So it's always good to just take it up part way, but not fully. So if there are bits that haven't properly stuck, you just go and put it back down and have another rub. So you might be wondering why I have decided to have this pink colour as my ground. Well, traditionally, gilding was done and is done on a kind of Italian red shade, and that's so that if any of the gold chips off, that it's all held together by a sense of warmth. And imagine if you just chipped a bit and there was white underneath. So I started using a kind of fluorescent pink as a kind of sort of pop art play on that traditional boule, it's called, or bowl. And also I think the colour will work really well under Jamel's skin as a ground. Here I've got a really soft brush, and so what I'm going to do now is use this soft brush to go over these bits that you can see of loose leaf. You could try sweeping these little gold dust crumbs up, but I tend to leave them for the fairies. It's looking pretty good. So let's have a look at that. So the thing that I love so much about gold is that how it's so organic and alive as to how the light falls on it. So if you have something on your wall in your house, it changes as the day bears on and the light moves around, and I love that about it. So it's time to get my paints out and start painting. I'm using oil because I tend to like to paint in oil the best. I really like being able to move the paint around, and I also find you could tend to get nicer paint pigments. There are people that use very strict palettes and certain colours, but I was never taught that way. I was just sort of mostly self-taught, and so I just like to work very instinctively and have fun. So the reason that I've got Jamel looking at me and I've got this Caravage-esque lighting is I want to really echo but bring up to date the icon paintings of the past and create a powerful image where Jamel is looking out empathetically at the viewer, and I want to capture something that's quite moving, and, well, we'll see how it goes. So I'm starting by mixing a dark shade to go in to model the darks, which is a mixture of ultramarine and sap green. But at the moment, I just want to get in the darks as a kind of way of drawing in, kind of an underpainting. You can see the pink of the ground that I'm working directly on. That alters the colours that I'm putting on it a lot, because it doesn't look like I'm putting green and blue on here. It's really coming off as brown, because the red colour of the ground is mixing in with what you can see. I often like to get the pad of my finger in to move the paint around. This is why I love oil paint so much, because it's so forgiving at moving things around, whereas with acrylic it dries so quickly, you don't have that luxury. So I've got the grid on here, on the reference picture, and I've got a faint grid from when I did the outline. so I can sort of see that I need to get that eye finishing about there. So right now, I'm just trying to drink Jamel in, and I work really instinctively, and I mix colours really instinctively, and I felt that a lot of it, where the light is hitting his face, the highlights, that there's quite a lot of green in that, but also there's a lot of the kind of golden brown and burnt sienna. So at the moment, I'm sort of like in the kind of wild stage of the painting where I'm kind of mixing colours and sort of throwing them at the panel, and we'll see how it goes. We'll refine it as I go along, but I'm just trying to feel through the colours and what they're saying they are to me. So I'm trying to mix a black, like the blackest thing, the darkest thing, without it being black. So I'm mixing together a purple and that sap green, which is really pigmented and strong. And then I feel like I need to put in the chin, which is about here, because that's one of the darkest things that I can see, that jawline. And also this bit here, which is the side of Jamel's head, just the top of his ear, where his hair is meeting the side of his... And this is the bits where you can see the oil is going a bit over where I've got the gilding, and also the way that the gold shines through the paint. It gives a lovely texture, which you want to keep. It's a lovely thing to have. So I feel like I've got enough down to start putting the eyes in with the structure of the face and with the highlights and the lowlights, but there's no particular rhyme or reason. Every painting can take me in a different direction. So trust your instincts when you're painting. Don't feel like, oh, but I should be doing this bit now, and I'm not, so it's all gone horribly wrong. There's no rule book. Like, you just work from what feels right and natural to you. So I've just swapped for a slightly smaller round brush because I feel like I'm going to go in and start the whites of the eyes and a little bit more detail. So I purposefully started with quite a large round brush, not too big, but so I could do quite loose gestural broad brush strokes. For the whites of eyes, they often have yellow in and blue, and they're never actually white. Sometimes they have a bit of red in. And I often will just put a little bit on and see how it's going, and it might immediately take it off and it be wrong. So let's have a go. Over my head. That's it. And then there's not as... It's a lot darker on this side, but maybe if I just put it on thinner, it will appear not as bright. So I feel like I can see blue here, the outer corner of Jamel's mouth, putting it on quite translucently. When I see a shadow, I don't think, oh, that's a dark version of what I can see in the light. I look at what colours are in that shadow, and invariably it'll be a cool shadow, it'll be a warm shadow, might have a bit of green in it, a bit of blue in it, and I'll go to that colour to start to make the shadow rather than a black or thinking of it in terms of just a darker version of the light tone. I've just got the ultramarine quite thinned out on the brush, and I'm taking that around places where I'm just sort of drawing in, so that needs to come in, some of the darker elements around the eyes. Don't be alarmed if things start to drip. Sometimes nice, happy accidents can happen. So, yeah, I'm trying to keep it quite fast and loose at this stage. Often the best bits, most exciting bits in a painting are bits that almost happen by mistake. They're the marks that you make before you make the proper marks. And often they've got a lovely energy and freedom to them. So I've immediately gone in and seen a green in Jamel's cheekbone there. And the other thing is, you might have thought that a lot of what I put on at first was quite dark, but then you see when you do put darker tones on, these things that looked quite dark at first actually aren't dark at all, and I could maybe do with some more colour in this area of shadow. Just using the grid reference again to double check where the nostrils should go, because they're very important to anchoring the composition. They're going to be another one of the darkest points. So I'm just putting them in lightly first. I feel like I need some highlights now. I've been working with that dark mixture. I want to just capture where the light hits Jamal's upper lip here, to suggest the lips more, and I've put the dark in. I'm now going for the lightest part. So this is a mixture of a kind of permanent rose and a green shade. So I'm going to look, I'm looking at the lip, but it's not the lip so much as the bit of skin next to the lip. I am blessed with a live model, and I also have a reference picture set up near my easel. Now, the advantages of the live model are that it opens up so much more scope than if you're just working from a photograph. Photographs are an incredibly valuable tool, but it tends to white out whites, it tends to flatten images. If you're not careful, you can end up doing a lovely painting of a photograph. But when I'm painting people, I really want to capture as much of that person as I can and see them through the prism of my eyes and what colours I see as the light falls on their flesh in front of me. So if you ever have the opportunity to work from a live model, you can persuade a family member to sit for you, then I urge you to do so. I'm getting to the point where I don't know if I should just leave what I've got, which I think is something nice and expressionistic. And if I labour longer, I might lose some of these lovely fresh marks, which I think are working really well. But even if I leave it at this very loose, unfinished stage, there's one thing that I do want to get just right, and that's the catch lights in Jamel's eyes. And if I place those just so, then that will really, really breathe life into the painting and be very rewarding. So it's, I try and save doing these right until the end if I have the self-control. I think it's finished. I mean, I could go on, but I'm liking where it's at. It's quite loose. Do you want to see it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Ah, mwah, that's good.
You like it?
I love it.
Do you see yourself?
I do see myself.
Do you like your halo?
I do like the halo. I do like the gold leaf, how it shines in the light. And yeah, exactly. Almost looks 3D-ish.
So I hope you can see how gold leaf might be worth giving a try and how exciting it is and experimental it can be. I love the way that it's so shimmery and yet solid and alive within the composition, and I really enjoy making marks that riff on that. And I think you can see that you don't need to have like a super finished master plan, that is something that you can experiment with and bring into your work in a kind of playful, joyful way.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. We first met today's tutor, Tom Croft, on Portrait Artist of the Year in 2018, when he painted presenter and journalist Kirsty Walk, who picked his portrait to take home.
I'm going to choose Tom's. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
2 years later, during lockdown, Tom took part in Portrait Artist of the Week, painting opera singer Leslie Garrett live on air. During the pandemic, Tom started the hashtag Portraits for NHS Heroes by offering a free portrait to the first NHS key worker to contact him online. He encouraged other portrait artists to do the same, and it grew into a global charity initiative for which Tom received a British Empire Medal in 2021. An expert colorist, Tom loves to experiment with his palette, which is why he is leading today's masterclass on pushing colour in portraiture.
Today, I'm going to show you how to bring your portraits to life with your use of colour. We're going to crank up the chroma, and it's a way of very safely experimenting and being very creative. Tone is key, form is key, but you can really take liberties with colour. So let's get at it. So I've got my reference here of my nephew Bash, who is an actor. So I've pre-drawn Bash on my canvas here. And I think there's a lot of snobbery, frankly, about working from life. I think it's a modern world. We're moving fast these days. By all means, take a couple of weeks, in my case, to draw up. Or you could trace an outline. I've got no problem with that. You could grid up an outline to give you the kind of benefit of proportion. But if your end goal is to produce a painting, I don't think it matters that much about the drawing. So I'm going to lay out my colour palette now. I like to lay out long, almost slug-like colours, because that way, when I get colour mixing, you don't want to dirty the colours. As you go and as you mix, you tend to drag different colours into these other colours. So to keep them nice and pure, to keep them nice and vibrant, you want to just have a nice long section you can just dip into and nick a little bit here and there. It's quite a good tip to keep your colours nice and clean. So I've got an old picture frame here, which I've recycled and using as the palette today. And the reason that's quite a good thing to do is you can put any coloured card underneath the glass. So I've put this grey, and it's exactly the same grey as I've got on my canvas. That way, I know that when I mix a colour here, whatever it looks like here, it's going to look exactly the same when I put it on the canvas. This won't shock you, but if you want to create bright, vibrant paintings, you're going to need some bright, vibrant colours on your palette, right? So the Zorn palette, very limited, very reduced. You can get some amazing colours out of it, but we're using some, look, bright, lively blues. This is called Scheveningen Blue Light. I believe it's from Holland. This is Golden Green Deep. So you can see I've really kind of turned the saturation up, and that's essential to create really kind of dynamic and lively portraits. So let's get on with some colour mixing, and the key to bright colours and sort of amping up saturation is to know how to control. So you need like a volume control on your colour, right? I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So here is some bright red, and you can see that, super zingy. And say I was trying to mix the colour of my skin here, look, and I'd think, all right, well, how do you figure out a colour? Firstly, I'd suggest you try and describe it with words. So I would say that is a kind of yellow ochre-ish kind of colour, so there's likely to be a bit of yellow ochre in it, so I'll reach for a bit of that, put that there. It's lighter than the colour of the tube, so I know I can add some white, obviously, to lighten that. So let's lighten that look. But it's looking far too pink, far too bright, far too saturated. So how can I get control of that colour? I'm going to mix my opposite colour, so I'm going to mix my green, and look how little I need. I'm going to get a tiny little nick there. And when you're mixing colours, try mixing them on the side like that. So don't dump all of the green into the middle of your mixes, because that will blow the whole thing apart. You want a bit of control. It's almost like cooking, where you're adding a little bit of seasoning to it. So taste it, see how you go, add a touch more. So let's get cracking on the painting. I'm going to start in a safe place. Like any job, you don't want to start with a really hectic, crucial detail. Start with a place we can warm up in. So I'm going to do the peak of the cap, and I'm going to describe that colour. It's a blue, because he's wearing a blue cap, but there's not a lot of colour in it that I can see. So we start with our blue, but obviously that's going to be too blue when we put it on, because that is just pure blue out of a tube. So how can I knock that back? We're going to use that opposite colour, aren't we? So I'm going to take a little bit of this orange, and I'm just going to add it on the side and just see. Now that's a little bit greenish. Am I seeing green there? Not particularly. So I'm just going to shuffle down from our orange to our red. And again, it's finding what neutralises that colour, and I think that's going to work pretty well. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's more neutral. So I'm pretty happy with that. So these early stages are me kind of feeling my way, but also just establishing some colour, establishing some tone, and we will get to the lively colours later. You really need some fairly dull, desaturated sections that will then contrast and amplify the brighter colours later. So the forehead is more or less blocked in now, and I'm going to reach for the glasses at this point, essential, because I can't actually see. Oh my God. So we're going to start to crank it up now, and I'm going to start to exaggerate what we see. So within his eyebrows here, there is a lighter patch we can see. There's a section that's going to run across here. And I'm going to take liberties with it because, as I say, if the tone is right, you can really go experimental. And I'm going to push it to quite a bright pink. So I've got some white here. I'm going to go Windsor red, which is a cool red. And just to show you how colour can kind of jump as soon as you introduce a little bit of it, this is going to look crazy, but it will give us permission for the rest of the picture to then really go for it with the colour. So here we go. I mean, you know, there are a few stages in life you can still say the word fwar, and I would say that is definitely one of them. Now, the right-hand side of his face is quite cool in its temperature, so we want to mix cooler colours, but over on this side, let me show you, it's much warmer, so I can take this kind of pinky mix I've got, I can add in a bit of, could even probably go orange, just a touch, so a little nick of it, add it in on the side, and we'll just put a mark of this down and see how it looks. So I'm going for just under his eyebrow. There's this very warm patch of reddish orange. Now, I accept that it's far brighter than the reference we're looking at now, but that's sort of the whole point of this. It's a very safe, creative playground colour, and you can really, really exaggerate. And think about your brush marks. Your brush marks are literally who you are. They're your fingerprint. They're what makes you unique as an artist. You hear artists talking about trying to find their style. It's the way you put paint down. So if you're a nervous, you know, one hair brush, twitchy artist, that's brilliant. Lean into that and make that your signature style. If you're a energetic, move at 100 miles an hour, virtually slam it into the canvas, that's great too, because particularly with AI coming in, we need artists to look unique and give us fresh views on portraiture and hopefully have a kind of human connection with it too. So celebrate your uniqueness through your brush marks. So up to this point, I've been using this synthetic brush, and it's very good for putting down nice, flat, smooth colour. But I want to mix it up a bit now and get a bit more texture in my marks. So I'm going to use this very sad, battered looking thing, very much like me. And the reason I'm switching to this is a hog hair brush. It will deliver slightly thicker gobs of paint, and you'll also see the kind of traces of the bristles in the paint. So now that we're establishing some form, let's go into detail with the hog hair brush. Okay, so let's get his eyebrows in now. So the colour I'm going to go for is a bit of viridian green, and the polar opposite colour to control it is this lovely dark sort of blood red alizarin. So there we go, we've put a kind of big old slug down there, and then we're just going to light it. So we're going to put in some of those highlights, and I can see, you'd probably describe it as a kind of greenish grey that is creating these highlights on his eyebrows, but that's a little bit dull. So let's go for some viridian, and watch the colour release when I add a bit of titanium white to it. Can you see? You suddenly see what colours, they all look very dead and flat here, but add a bit of white into them and they have this wonderful zing to them. And I'm going to put that just on this side. Now this, we've already said, is the warmer side of the face, so that's quite a cool green. And there is a really good rule: if the shadows are warm, the highlights are cool, and vice versa. So bear that in mind. So for this eyebrow, we're on the cool side. So let's have a slightly kind of warmer. So I've added a little bit of orange, a little bit of a warmer colour into that. So I've started to slowly turn the colour up a bit here, and I'm going to work on the eyes next. And the way I tend to construct an eye is, and I think this is true of any painting, don't get bogged down in the detail too early. So I'm just going to drag some green across the whole of this iris here. Look at that, in one mark. So now the whites of the eyes are almost never white. And you should look for colour in them. There's often a lot of blue, often a lot of purple, some greens sometimes. So if you were looking at this reference, you will see that the brightest part on this reference is probably the highlight on his cheekbone and maybe the one on his nose. But his eyes are kind of in relative shadow. So don't, with your brain, think, well, it's the whites of the eyes, so I need to reach for the white. You don't. You just need to paint what you see. And I can see a kind of, what, greeny, bluey grey. So that's what I'm going to put in here, look. So you get to these points quite a lot where you're painting and you've completely covered up the whole of the palette, and I'm struggling to find areas to mix nice, bright, fresh colours in. So let's scrape it back, and I'll do this at least 2 or 3 times a day. And when you're scraping all this paint away that you're not going to use, why not recycle it? You could put it on your next canvas and prime it, because any bunch of colours mixed together will ultimately go grey, and you're toned and you're ready to go on your next canvas. So how about that? You can recycle your used paint. So we're now going to look at the nose, and let's get that going. I'm going to be using a hog hair brush, and I want to talk about little strands of colour that you can get into your marks if you don't over mix. So there is a technique I use where I mix fairly fast, and you can see the strands of pigment. Let me show you. So here is some Windsor red, here's some titanium white, and let's say a bit of lemon yellow. And those 3 together, you could mix, 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 and you would have a very controlled, flat, certain tone that you could put down on your painting. But if you want to bring these marks to life, why not just drag a quick figure of 8 through that paint? So you can see there are pure marks of yellow, there are pure marks of the red and the white. So hopefully, when we put our mark down now, you should be able to see, there we go, all of the constituent parts. You can see a little bit of yellow there, little bit of the orange, and a bit of red coming through. And when you're putting your marks down, just remember not to over-blend as you're putting the mark down, because obviously that's more mixing that will dull our colours. So if you're putting a mark down, try and put it down in one go and then back off. So this is still all a bit safe. So let's have a look at this nostril on the left, and I'm going to paint it with pure red. Sounds like madness, and it is, but there we go. Pure bright red. And we're just going to drop it in. So as soon as I've got my colour right on my brush, I think, right, now I've got to think about the angle. I put this down, 1 mark. Just drag it in there like that. And I'm happy with that. When you spot the same colour somewhere else on your painting, don't be afraid to go back and put it in there. You don't always have to mix just for the area that you're working in. And I've noticed there is a very bright red up here in the corner of his eye, and I'm going to put this crazy neon red in there, which might look a bit kind of like blood, but actually it's just a vibrant thing of colour. I don't know about you, but sometimes your hands shake a little bit. And when you're trying to go in for those details, you need your hand to be rock solid. So what you can do is you can use a ruler. You can anchor your ruler like this. It's just got a bolt through it, anchor it on the board, and you've basically got a safe, solid, straight platform to work off. So no matter how much my hands are shaking, I can angle it to where I want to put this highlight in. I can get to the right place, and I can just run my brush. In fact, I'm going to do it from here. I can run my brush along the metal ruler like that, look. So I've got into the middle of a bit of wet paint, and I'm able to just put that mark down with confidence. Okay, so we're now going to go to the kind of highlights on his cheekbone and on this side. Now, we've talked about the fact this is the cool side and this is the warm side. So I'm going to pick a cool green. You might look at this colour and think, how on earth are you going to make a highlight out of something that dark? Well, if we use a tiny bit of it and lots and lots of titanium white, very loosely mixed, as you see, we're going to get that level of green. I'm mindful of the form of the head, so I want this highlight to cut all the way across to there. And I instantly love that. So I'm happy with the tone of it. And I'm very happy with the fact that we've got some green in there, which is an invention. You can see it's not there, but we are trying to just make this more interesting. Why just replicate what you see? Everyone else can see that. So why not show them the way you see colour? And that gives them an insight into your brain, into your world, and hopefully makes it more interesting to look at. Now, within a highlight, you can actually have shifts in temperature. So I do see this cool green on this side. I actually see it just being a little bit warmer here. So on the tip of it, I'm actually going to reach for our warmer green. So this is like a warm olive green. And I'm going to mix a touch of that in. So when I put the highlight in here, just on the tip, it will be a little bit brighter, but also a little bit warmer. So can you see that? That it's just turning towards the warmer side of the face. And so that creates the illusion of the form turning. So you might be thinking these colours look kind of slightly bonkers, but this is all part of what we call pushing colour. So in other words, exaggerating the colour that you see. If our tones are right, we can put any colour, as hopefully I'm demonstrating. We've got reds, greens, purples, browns, and they'll all work in harmony if we get our tones balanced right. So really push it, really give it a go. Painting teeth is generally frowned upon with artists. It can look really strange. When animals in the wild bare their teeth, it's a sign of aggression. So you rarely see portraits of people smiling. And when I smile, it's terrifying, isn't it? So worth bearing that in mind. So what do? Well, you summarise. So I'm going to squint and I'm aware there are teeth in there, but I'm going to pick a general shadow tone. And I'm going to draw in where I know his teeth are in one mark. I think we need to work on the eyes a bit more now. So the reason I've left them until this point is because of this whole idea of think about the whole wood and not getting bogged down focusing on the trees. Otherwise, you can never see past that detail. So it's time to put in pupils, it's time to put in highlights. So there's the really kind of fun finishing touches to a picture. And just for this sketch, I think we're probably at that point. So let's start with the pupils. So I want to look at this highlight above the pupil, and I'm going to mix a little bit of green in with it. Because if you add some colour into your highest highlights, it will just add a bit of texture and add a bit of form to it. White is the absence of all form, so bear that in mind. I think I'm happy with that now, so I'm going to clear some space on my palette and block in a brightly coloured background that should hopefully make sense of my colour choices. So by blocking in this background, we've created a fairly abstract environment for him to exist in, but it also has made sense of these colour choices. They don't look as bizarre. So you can create the most imaginative, colourful world, and your subject suddenly makes sense in it because of that. So hopefully this demo has showed you that colour is fun and it is a safe space to experiment in, so go for it. You won't always want to amplify the colours as much as this, but it is a safe space, so crank up the chroma and enjoy it.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor is Stuart Jarvis, who first caught our attention in 2020 with his charcoal submission for Landscape Artist of the Year, which earned him a place in the competition.
Yeah, it's a very vigorous drawing. It's charcoal, which lends itself to be worked and scrubbed out, which gives the whole thing this dynamism.
This has got a brutality about it in the way they've attacked the paper with the charcoal. It's really powerful.
At the Heat, his bold drawing of Chartwell House in Kent landed him in the final 3.
The second artist on the shortlist is Stuart Jarvis.
A champion of charcoal, it is only fitting that Stuart is leading today's masterclass, creating textures in charcoal landscapes.
Today, I'm going to be demonstrating different techniques of drawing using just a rubber and charcoal. Charcoal is often misunderstood as a complicated and messy medium, but today I'm going to show you different techniques and tips on how to use a really expressive and versatile medium. What I like to do is firstly to stand up at my easel. That's really important for me to kind of get this expressive motion. I don't want to be too close, because I don't feel as though I can capture the whole mood of the piece simultaneously in one. I have my reference photograph next to me at the same height as the paper, so I can easily cross-reference any of these details over to the paper. Firstly, I'm going to use a short piece of kind of fat charcoal. I'm going to hold it flush against the paper. I'm going to create what's called a charcoal ground. Cover the entire sheet of the paper with the charcoal ground. Oops. And then once you've done that, you then need to work the charcoal into the surface of the paper, because at the moment it's just sitting across the top and could just be easily moved around. The importance of the ground is twofold, really. Firstly, it takes away that intimidating nature of that white page. Secondly, the charcoal ground is really important for operating as a mid-tone. It means that we can go both lighter in value and darker in value as well. So we're not just starting at the lighter values and going darker, but we're somewhere in between. To start with, you need a reference photograph. And I've chosen this photograph because of its broad range of tonal values. It's a powerful image of a winter morning underneath Spaghetti Junction. In the background, these flyovers offer us a mid-tone from which this beautiful skeletal kind of architectural foliage is presented in front of it. And then dominating the composition is this large pillar filled full of graffiti. I'm really looking forward to tackling that in today's lesson. Each one of these different elements offers us a different opportunity to experiment with texture, and I'll show you some of those techniques as the drawing unfolds. Firstly, I'm going to ghost out the composition, and ghosting means drawing, but drawing at a really light level. Drawing in a way that's kind of really forgiving. So if I do make a mistake, I can just quickly rub it out, not even with a rubber actually, just the back of my hand, and just start again. So to start the ghosting off, I'm looking at this diagonal line that intersects through the edge of the corner of the paper over here, and I'm holding the charcoal flush against the page, and I'm creating this lovely straight line. Now, you can draw a straight line just with the tip of the charcoal, but you'll find that really difficult. Holding it flush keeps that line really straight. Okay, so just get a basic understanding of the proportions. I can start with this kind of major mark here, which for me kind of separates out from the rest of the composition, this point. And it's worth then getting that as kind of like an anchor point for the rest of the photograph. It appears in my photograph about a third of the way down. So let's just check that on my composition over here. And yeah, that appears about a third. So I'm happy with that. I've got my composition mapped out. So I'm now at the stage now where I'm ready to apply light tone. For the lightest areas, I'm going to go to my next trusted medium, and that is rubber. And I'm using two different types of rubber. I'm using the classroom rubber and the faithful putty rubber. I'm going to show you different types of marks that these make on the drawing itself. Now, where do I apply those light areas of tone? Well, obviously in the negative space in the background, light sky penetrating through the composition. But I can also see that there are really light areas, white areas almost, within these concrete platforms, and actually also on the right-hand side of the pillar as well. So let's start up here and with the classroom rubber and use the hard edge of that to create this hard, sharp mark across the edge of that concrete pillar over here, or the concrete upright. And you can see that it creates kind of like a hatching mark, but also this lovely straight edge to it as well. Now, I'm not going to use all of this rubber in all of that area because it leaves like a residue across the surface of it. And you can blow that off or just brush that off. That's a price that we pay for using this rubber, and that's something that the putty rubber will not do. It stays together really, really well, but just doesn't give us that sharp edge. Make a mark, and you can see it goes from lighter slightly to darker over here, and that's because the charcoal occupies the surface of that putty rubber, and I just need to bend it over and find a new spot to start working back over again. So I'm going to do that in all of the other areas to begin with. And that's our next job, is just to ensure that we've got all of those elements down. I also want to give a sense of form of this column, and that's helped by these dripping paint marks or dripping marks on the surface of it. So I'm going to drag my rubber over the surface, just corresponding to those areas that are light, and just work those into the surface to begin with. I'm happy with where I've placed all of those light tones. Now we need to consider the darkest areas of tone. I come over to my tonal chart and notice that here, this mid-tone here is what I've already established down. Now we can't go to the darkest area, tonal area number 5, because that actually is a double layer of charcoal, firstly with a fixative spray that grips the charcoal to the surface of the paper. Once it's dried, I can then work another charcoal layer over the top, and it goes this really rich, dark tone. But we're going to go to this level here first, and then work over the fixative on areas of my composition where I feel tonal area number 5 is needed. So let's work really broadly, much like we did the rubber, across the whole composition where we feel tonal gradient number 4 is situated. So I'm going to start identifying those areas now. Firstly, let's just get the darkest we can possibly get down with just the willow charcoal itself. Now, you're going to lose some of the ghosting. You're going to lose some of those lines. You're going to have to be prepared to do that. Don't worry about that. That will come back. So it really emphasizes the point about layering with charcoal, is that one veil goes over the other, and it slowly emerges. It's almost like it's coming toward us out of a veil of fog, as if we're entering into the composition. It slowly starts to crystallize and detail as the drawing evolves. Apart from the top area up here, which I'm going to return to later on, all of the tone has been established. It's not accurate, but it's where I want it to be, and we've started to understand kind of the different levels of the landscape from foreground to background. And now I'm going to get to the really exciting bit about adding texture. I'm really looking forward to this. The first part I want to do is kind of establish these skeletal trees, but I must make sure that these roads in the background are where I want them to be, because once I start establishing these architectural winter trees, I'm not going to be able to return to that background because they'll be covered. So it's going to be really difficult for me to do that. So what I'm going to do is introduce a new tool, and this is a blending stick, and it's wrapped around condensed paper, and it will allow me to work charcoal into finer areas that perhaps my fingertips wouldn't allow me to do. I'm interested in finding that level of detail within these background flyovers. And you can see that there's a darker underbelly to each of these roads, and then there's a lighter top that has these parallel lines running across it. At the moment, I don't have that, so I'm just going to work the charcoal in again, and always apply the charcoal first, and then we can use the blending stick to just work those hatching marks into the surface. Okay. I'll come back to those parallel lines up here and up here shortly. Let's come down to the bottom flyover and work those marks in here. Notice fingertips, marks, accidental areas that I'd inadvertently put across the composition. Don't worry about those. That tightening, that refreshing, that refining can all take place later on. Now it's the time for me to be able to establish some really crisp, textured mark making. So bring some of the natural form in over the top of this area of the composition. I'm going to do that with a relatively thin piece of willow charcoal, and I'm going to hold it up vertically to the paper. I'm going to use that kind of dragging technique, which allows me to be able to pull the charcoal down into position. As I come down, dragging these marks down, I'm actually just pushing slightly harder as they get towards their base. What that does, it sort of adds this kind of tapering effect where obviously the top of the tree is generally finer, more intricate, thinner, and thicker towards the trunk itself at the bottom. Now, the really fine ones at the top is this opportunity for me to now change charcoal. And I'm actually going to use a different grade of charcoal. And this one's much finer. It's not willow charcoal, but it's a much lighter type of charcoal. It's actually in a square format. And this allows me to have really light marks at the top. If by using the edge of this charcoal, I'm able, again, flush, just to create these really soft marks at the top. This area up here on the reference photograph is a really complicated mass of branches over here. And I feel like to draw every single one of those branches is just really unnecessary. So I'm just going to try and create a little cloud, if you like, brushing the charcoal across the surface and just working that in with my fingertip. And then I'm going to start to just work some marks over the top of that. What I love about drawing it from the urban environment, and in this case underneath Spaghetti Junction, is this wonderful sense of hostility. It's a cold, sometimes intimidating place, but out of it you get this wonderful beauty and this kind of brutalist beauty to it as well. There's extraordinary shapes, extraordinary shadows, and whilst there's not many people around, that sense of isolation around these enormous structures can be awe-inspiring. Having just finished the trees, even they seem to be absent of life. This wonderful kind of structure and this playoff between these different textures now takes us to the point where we're interested in our centerpiece, our kind of main act. And in this column, we've got this wonderful playoff of different graffiti. And we're really interested in almost developing a new type of drawing language that represents the graffiti, but doesn't read it out. So the way I'm going to do that first is just using some willow charcoal across the surface, and I'm almost going to do like a continuous line. I'm not interested in drawing, as I said, each individual letter out, but I'm just going to make these random marks and just flow over the surface. I'm now going to push back that lettering, and I'm going to use the classroom rubber to do that. Following on with the column and the form, you'll notice if you just brush it over the surface, it just takes away the clarity of that line and just pushes it back so it dissolves into the column. I love this part. I love the blurring effect that you can create. Return to the charcoal again, and let's work over another layer. Okay, I'm ready, I think, for one of my favorite bits now. It's time to return to the rubber, but we're not going to use the classroom rubber or the putty rubber, but instead we're going to use two different retractable pen erasers, and they've got slightly different ends to them. You can see one is really fine, and it really is for the finest of details, and then another one which is kind of more blocky and square. So I'm going to start working these into this area over here, this natural form area. Try and hold it like a paintbrush between your fingertips, much like you were the charcoal, and allow marks to be able to kind of drag across the surface. Notice as well that when I'm dragging this across the surface, if I rotate it, I get more of a naturally occurring, softer, wavier, meandering line. Now I'm going to put the pen eraser away for a minute because it's the putty rubber we need to develop more texture in the column. I'm just going to point it slightly so I get this kind of slightly sharper edge to it. And I'm going to do almost the same that I did with the charcoal, but now with the putty rubber. So think less of it as an eraser, more of a drawing tool to help us understand some of this texture in here. Just trying to identify some of these lighter pockets that kind of form the spaces between some of the lettering. And making those marks, just really trying to get like a gestural sort of sweep across it. We're coming towards the end of the drawing. And what I want to do at this stage is apply fixative to this area at the top to make it go even darker. So that will reach our grade 5 tone on the chart over here. Now, the problem with fixative is that as soon as you apply it down, you cannot rub that area out. So you've got to be pretty sure that where you're applying the fixative down, you're not going to need the rubber ever again. The reason why I'm using fixative is I want to grip all of that dark charcoal to the paper for me to then return a new layer over the top. But I'm not quite finished with some of the sky, so I'm going to keep the sky as it is, but protect it with my drawing tool here, and then spray using the fixative over that area here, protecting the sky. So I'm going to come back to that. I want to make that a little bit lighter in a minute. So I'm just going to put that over, and I'm just going to spray a little area over here, protect the sky here, and then just work it in. Make sure you're spraying it in a really well-ventilated area, keep the windows open, or just run outside and spray it, and then run back into the studio. So I feel pretty confident that that is going to grip now, so I'm going to carry on with the drawing. So let's draw that straight line in to begin with. We're looking at our reference photograph over here. So just draw that in. and then just work the charcoal in over the top. This is the fun bit where actually you can leave the hatching marks in. Remember first I held the charcoal flush to the paper. I don't want you to do that now. I want you to use these hatching marks because this is expressive, it is versatile medium. This is the type of marks we should be leaving across the surface. I think it's only fitting that the last part of the drawing is this sunburst coming through in the background. So firstly, I'm just going to work and just make sure I get that light, beautiful light coming out from the background. I'm just going to work a little bit into these trees as well. I need to establish kind of where the center of that flare is. And I'm going to try using my my straight edge to see if I can get that dart of light, just using the putty rubber alone and just kind of work it along it. Yeah, that's quite good. I'm quite pleased with that. So let's find that center point again and just pull away and just rotate and use that center point as like as a pivot. Just pull away from that. The final texture. I'm really happy with the drawing that I've created, and I hope I've shown you just how versatile charcoal is, how expressive it is, and how immediate it is. I hope what this has taught you is that you just need the most basic material, just a few pieces of charcoal and a few rubbers and a piece of paper. So why don't you get yourself out there in the urban environment and give it a go yourself.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Jude Wainwright, won her heat on Portrait Artist of the Year painting German comedian Henning Wehn, who chose her portrait to take home.
I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? So, absolutely perfect work. Thanks so much.
And earned her a place in the semi-final, where she painted singer-songwriter Rebecca Ferguson.
I love the expression that she's got.
I love the way in which she dealt with the glitter, the sparkles. She sort of matted them down. She did them on her own terms.
Jude loves to weave stories into her paintings, which is why she is leading today's masterclass, Narrative in Portraiture.
Today I'm going to be showing you how you can insert narrative into your paintings, whether it's inserting a subtle backstory into a portrait or getting yourself a whole crazy new surreal world. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks as to how you can achieve that. It's quite daunting starting with a blank canvas. You don't always know what you want to paint. I've started following through with like flashes of thought or dreams that I've had to come up with ideas for my content of my paintings. And quite often you'll find that they're a lot more exciting to do because they come from your heart, from your head, from your subconscious. What I do quite often is I use my phone to jot down drawings and ideas. And today I'm going to show you how I would take that original sketch that I did in the night at 3 a.m. that seemingly means nothing to creating a whole painting just from that small idea. I've printed it out here a bit bigger just so I can make sense of things a bit better. So what's happening here is I have a book for a head and I'm eating eggs that are fried and I'm holding some cutlery and a plate, basically. And, you know, when I had the dream, I was like, that's weird. Can that be a painting? What will people say? When people say, what does that mean? What will I say? But, you know, you don't have to worry about that because it's your dream. Do what you want. It's your painting. And it's fun. And I recommend it. So what I did was printed off various images of me in this position. So now I'm just gonna have a bit of a play with these images on the canvas. This is quite a fun bit. It just gives you a chance to sort of have a look on the space, see how things are gonna work together. When you've picked your composition, now you can start putting on the individual elements onto your canvas. What I like to use is this really cool stuff. It's carbon paper. So there's a sort of shinier side and a matte side, and we want the shiny side on the canvas, kissing the canvas. So I don't know what this is called, but it's a pointy stick that jabs through the image onto the carbon paper, onto the canvas, and you should have your image at the end. So it's super simple. You literally just trace around your image like you would on tracing paper, just anywhere that you want to be printed. Just draw around. So there you go. That's the compositions coming together really nice. It all fits together on the canvas. There's just a few bits that I just need to add in with the pencil. I'm gonna put just a round table. It can be so loose. So yeah, I think I'm happy with that. I'm done with the pencil part. Let's paint. For this particular painting, I'd like to do quite a deep colour in the background. I sort of picture this scene as being in a dingy restaurant. And so I was trying to think what kind of colours that might evoke, and rich, deep ones were the ones that came forward. So I'm going to do that. I'm making a sort of blood red, weirdly. Just make sure you get all your colours mixed together, blended nicely. What I then like to do is mix in some turpentine to thin things down. Okay. So I have this handy-dandy contraption here that holds my turpentine. A good thing about this contraption is it's got this fun little sort of netted thing in it that separates the silt from your brush. You use it to clean your brushes, and the silt settles below, and you can use the clean turps up above it. All you have to do is just separate it out. I like to store mine in jam jars after a session of painting, and then if you come back to it the next day, the silt will have separated at the bottom, and you can pour off the top terps and reuse it a few times. You just want to mix in a bit of terps at a time into your colour. So let's just put some on in the background. Ooh, that's a nice colour. I like that colour. And then just spread it around. Don't be too precious. Really, I'm just trying to fill this space so I can get on with the rest. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that background for now. It's just a loose representation. It's more the colour that I was after and filling the canvas. I'm just going to clear this part away off my palette so you can start mixing a fresh colour without the colours mixing together and bothering each other. I'm just going to start mapping out these areas of shadow and darkness. And it doesn't have to be super precise, but at this stage I just want to fill as much canvas as I can with a colour. When you're putting together different images that were taken at different times and places, it's hard to make them look like they're part of the same image and the same picture and that they all happened at the same time. One of the ways that you can help this is by ensuring that the light comes from the same direction on each of the objects. So here I'm just putting the shadows on this egg plate. As you can see on the figure, the light's coming from this direction. On the egg plate, the light's coming from this direction. It just helps everything marry together a bit more. I'm gonna block in my book, my head book. So again, this bit is just really loose. I'm just trying to find the dark areas. It's all about just getting some colour on your canvas, filling in these gaps, and then the detail comes later. So when you use like a thin terps method of doing the background and making the shadows, sometimes the lines can get a bit blurred, and I like to just keep checking in with them and going over them and making sure the image is clear on the canvas. I'm just going to go in and outline certain parts. This is a good point to really accentuate where all the shadows are on the painting. So once again, fulfilling your narrative and trying to recreate that original dream. I'm going to paint in the diamonds of the leotard that I'm wearing in this image. For years, I've painted myself in it because I didn't want to have to keep thinking about what to dress myself in. It's a bit of laziness, really, but I really liked it and I ran with it and I thought it looked cool. And now it's sort of become its own thing. Clothing in general can add to your narrative. For instance, if you wanted to put someone in regal clothing or in, I don't know, rags or something, it connotates different things depending on what you dress your characters in, which is cool because it all adds to the narrative of your painting. It all helps you be enveloped into this world that you're trying to create on the canvas. I've mapped out the diamond pattern there and everything's starting to come together really nice now. I think next it might be cool to move on to the head, just to keep marrying the picture together. It'd be cool to sort of get an idea as to the personality of the book head. So when I was thinking about the book, in my head it was a sort of antique-y, old style book that I went for, and I really like this green colour to use, especially with the background being this rich red. I think the green will stand out quite nice from it and bring it forward as the central part of the painting. Colour can evoke so many feelings, and when you're creating a piece of narrative, I don't need to tell you that hot pinks and reds bring energy and vibrance to a painting, and greens and blues can calm you down, and there's so many different ways you can use colour to your advantage. It's a great tool. I'm quite happy with how that's looking at the moment. More and more, like as you add each step, the painting starts to come to life. It's quite exciting. I'm just gonna paint in the pages now in just a simple beige. So I'm just keeping the top of it quite light, and then I'll do the sides in the shadow to sort of give it that 3D look. The book's starting to look quite booky. One important aspect I need to add now, as it's a self-portrait, is the face. Now, considering it's a book, we have to be a bit creative, and I'm thinking what it needs is just a good pair of eyes. You know, they're the window to the soul. They'll add some good character, and once you have that on your painting, there's a lot of emotion that can be depicted from the eyes, and it'll help with the narrative because it will denote the feeling of the painting a lot more, adding some personality into it. So I'm just going to use this teeny brush now, just to draw out quite quickly the eyes, and then I'll paint in the detail after that. Something I like to do is reuse colours that are already on my palette when making colours for elsewhere on the painting, because I think it sort of helps the painting become more unison if I use the same colours throughout it, as opposed to mixing one colour, then mixing the next colour. Okay. I like to keep it a bit illustrative. It's just playful, it's fun. And like I say, when you're painting certain bits from your head, from your dreams, it's a lot easier to keep it less absolutely realistic, especially seeing as the whole topic is it's from a dream. Like the narrative is whimsical and fantasy. It sort of marries in if you paint in an illustrative way as well. Why don't we now concentrate on what we're eating? I've done a couple of paintings now with eggs in, and I wonder, because all of these paintings come from dreams or subconscious thoughts, I wonder if there's something about eggs that's symbolic to me. Quite often, months down the line, I'll realise what it means. It's always good when you come up with an idea to just do it, whether you know what it means or not. On the egg yolks, I've paid attention to the shadows and light areas and added the darker yolky colours here at the bottom and then the shiny, lighter yolky colours on the top, just to add that sort of 3D yolky globby look. Next up, I'm just going to put the white colour around the yolks. I'm quite pleased with how the eggs are looking. The one final flourish is to put some highlights on top of the yolk, just to set everything off a bit. So just get the lightest white you can and blob it on. No terps. And that just really sets them off, makes them ping. And there we go. Eggs on a plate. I think we're going to do the flesh tones on the skin. I paint myself all the time, and you just sort of get a feel for what your particular tone is. And also, I like to accentuate certain colours. Like I really like the crimson colour, and so I add a bit more of that in. But I just sort of make colours now off the top of my head and use the reference as more of where to put dark, light and middle as opposed to where the exact tones of colour go. I'm going to start out with this big fat brush that I like and work quite big at first and then go down to the finer detailed areas. So because I want these areas to be highlighted, I'm going to add this bright white just in those bits. Not a lot because you can overdo it, but again, it's just to sort of marry everything together. I'm really happy with how that painting's coming along. I think I'm going to go away and do a bit more rendering on it, a bit more work. But I'm so happy with the layout that we've got so far, and I'm pretty sure it's a good reflection of my dream. I used to paint paintings that I thought people wanted to see and need an explanation, but now I follow my gut and my dreams, and the work I'm doing is a lot more authentic and fun. And I really encourage you to do the same. I hope you can try and do it because it'll just bring out a lot of joy in your work.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Charles Williams, won his heat on Portrait Artist of the Year in 2019 with his sensitive portrait of actor Asa Butterfield.
I think Charles was able to distill an essence of Asa, which for me actually lives in the hold of the head on that neck. There's a sort of fragility there that Asa really did have.
At the semi-final, he produced a dramatic, full-length portrait of musical theatre legend Elaine Page.
I love that sweeping drape, and it's sort of got an impressionist feel about it, hasn't it?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Rather than working from life, Charles often creates compositions based on his childhood memories and artistic influences, which he will demonstrate in today's masterclass, Improvising with Watercolour.
Today I'm looking at watercolour as a way of improvising images. You're not tied into sources, you're not working from photographs or from drawings, but rather inventing things from your imagination. I got watercolour paper. Always important to use watercolour paper because it's strong enough to stand up to the rigours of painting. Got a nice lot of clean, fresh water, and of course I got my paints and my brushes. Now, I'm using 3 different pieces of paper. One of the things about watercolour is it takes a long time to dry, and I'm going to use this to my advantage, as you'll see, because what's going to happen is I'm going to make an image on each different piece of paper, and I'm going to develop each one as it goes along. So, I'm going to start out with this one. If you're going to paint from the imagination, you will have a whole array of different things going on in your mind. But it's kind of choosing and it's kind of imagining which one is going to work. This is a sort of random way of approaching painting where you make marks and you look at the marks and you try and see what the image might be. So that's going to be my first mark. I'm going to paint it and then just put it aside. And I'll start with this. A certain amount of chaos is inevitable in doing this, and probably a good thing. You need to sort of make mistakes and have second thoughts. I'm going to change the colour here. Another thing you can do is use your loo paper to take marks away. But I'm just really applying the paint in a random fashion. I'm thinking, in this painting, I'm thinking this shape here seems to be some form of figure, and then this behind could be a sky. So I'm just going to see if I can make that work. Now this paint, it's watercolour in a tube. That's all it is. There's nothing special about it except it is a particularly bright, well, particularly light and rather opaque blue. But I'm using it quite thinly, and I'm using it, as you can see, on a coloured paper. So that is going to make its own problem, or its own excitement, just depending on how you see things. I'm going to put that to one side now and let that dry while I move on to another one. This is a very old technique, actually. I know it might seem quite strange, but it's a very old technique. Leonardo da Vinci writes about this technique. And then a couple of hundred years later, the great Anglo-Russian painter Alexander Cousins wrote a whole book on how to extemporize landscape by doing exactly this. I sometimes use this technique as a way of working out or developing images for a sort of larger painting that I can work on in oil paints, you know, on a much bigger scale. Equally, I find it a really good way of reanimating what I'm up to, rethinking about what my paintings might be. Now, I'm going to add some more colour to this, but it's going to be much thicker and drier. So I'm going to find one of my thicker brushes, and I'm going to apply what is called dry brush technique, but I don't really like that. I don't really like the terminology. It just seems to me this is when I put dry paint in. And the reason I'm doing this is I sort of think I've got an image coming here, and I'm hoping it's going to work. One of the great things about doing this is you've got three things on the go all the time. So if I just get one out of it, if just one of them has an image that I like, then great. I've won. Maybe I'll have all three. Maybe all three will come together. I don't know. But just one is a gift. It doesn't matter. It's just good. What I'm doing with the dry brush is I'm almost giving you edges of things, but it's so loose and so broad that it serves more to hint at than to define things clearly. I just sort of think I see somebody playing a trumpet. I think I do. And I think there's a head there. So he's sort of turning away. We'll just have to see. Right. I'm going to leave this at this point because it is sort of suggested there's something coming out, there's something there, and there's a great deal more than is over here. Also, some of these paintings have sort of dried off a bit more, so I can go over to use these and think about what might be going on there. I'm just seeing whether putting this yellow on, which I haven't done any yet so far, just seeing whether that helps the image. I'm not sure about this painting. Not sure where this one's going. Sometimes it's worth sort of pushing away at it and really trying to achieve something, and then sometimes it's worth just putting it to one side and letting it dry, and maybe something will occur to you later on. So back on to number 3 now. The language that I use in painting, which is the language that most figurative painters use, is that of dark and light. You have colour as well, but light and dark show how form is made, show how shapes are made. Every time I take something off, I make it lighter. Every time I put something on, I make it darker. And in this case, I'm sort of seeing a figure here, and I'm seeing the light coming from that side. It's only very vague at the moment, but that's why I'm taking stuff off here. But again, I'm not being terribly precise about it. I don't want my options to be closed down too quickly. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce a different element, which is this sort of homemade paint that I have. Watercolour is made out of pigment, which is raw colour dug from the earth or made in a laboratory. It's raw colour mixed with a thing called gum arabic. And what gum arabic does is it holds the pigment together so that when it's diluted in water and then put on the paper, the gum arabic just about holds the surface of the paint together as it sits on the paper. So it's raw and dry and looks terrible, and then I scratch into it with a very strong brush and then just sort of dab it over. I think there's a monkey in here, but I'm not really sure. Okay, something's happening there, and I'm going to put that to one side before it overdoes itself. Maybe I should work on this one. Maybe a horse is emerging here. Maybe I've got the side of a horse straight on. And maybe for once, this is quite rare with my work, for once the legs are kind of going off the bottom of the page rather than there being something for it to sort of stand on. I don't know. I just have to see what comes out. Right, I'm going to go back to this painting, which I think is somebody playing the trumpet. And that's actually a first for me. And what I'm thinking now is this painting and the other two paintings, they're all almost in a similar place. They're all almost at the same point of resolution. The image that's emerged is just coming out. Each one is just about there, but not entirely, and obviously needs a lot more sort of work. So I'm going to carry on with this trumpet player. One thing to point out here is that I'm using quite thick brushes, and I'm not going for detail at all at this point. Really good idea not to do that. You don't want to get bogged down in detail, because if you do that, you'll slow down your invention. You'll slow down your ability to see what the shapes might be telling you. So now I'm going to use, with no forethought whatsoever, and it may be completely the stupidest, wrongest thing to do, I've just decided to do this background in this alizarin red. May cause me trouble, it may not. What's happened at this point is that I've noticed a shape which I think could make the horse's head, and I've taken my dry brush and I've pushed it through just at a point where two tones meet, so a dark bit and a light bit. And coupled with the fact that I've kind of used a browny kind of dry paint, which sort of echoes or sort of makes you think about what horse kind of certain colours of horses are, it's suddenly given an idea of how the light would be operating on that particular form. It's an interesting moment because it's a moment where I think, well, okay, this is definitely what that form is going to be. But now I have to work out how I take it further, how I make that form more convincing, how I make it more three-dimensional. So I'm going to let that dry for a bit and probably carry on with the trumpet playing now. At this point, I'm making smaller and smaller decisions because I've sort of got what the painting's about. I don't have to make large things anymore, but what I'm doing is I'm finessing. I'm just sort of coaxing it out more and more exact. So at this point, I'm really wanting to make the trumpet precise and exact. I want you to know what kind of instrument he's blowing on. So I'm using this really bright yellow to build up the clash of the trumpet. Now at this point, I'd be quite happy to stop. I think it's sort of becoming something that I can recognise. It's becoming an image, and it's certainly something that I've never done before. So for me, it's quite exciting. It's a new image. I might maybe put in another painting, or an image, or on itself, it might stand as a finished painting. But I think part of what I've been trying to do today is already quite clear in this, that an image has emerged from my imagination. I've improvised some shapes and this figure has come out of it. It's sort of up to me now, and it would be up to you if you were doing this kind of thing, how much further you want to take it, how much more you want to resolve it. But for the moment, I'm gonna put that to one side and say that's done, and I'm gonna go back to my horse painting. I'm gonna try and define it, try and make it work in a more sort of detailed way. Rules looking for what I think might be dark, what I think might be light, and I'm just using a very neutral, dark colour to do that. So I think I'm going to leave this one just for a while, let it dry, and turn my attention to my third painting, which I'm not really quite sure how it's going to go, and it's sort of really got to more of a sort of desperate point. I don't quite know how I'm going to sort this painting out. One of the things you can do when you're desperate at this point is to use opaque paint. The reason you use opaque paint is it's direct. You can just blob it on and it will stay on the surface. It's gouache, which really is the same as watercolour, only it has something called whiting added to it. One of the problems with it is that you can't really get it off as quickly as you can watercolour paint. So you've got to be very sure about where it's going to go. Now, I think what I'm seeing here is a monkey sitting down. I think so. And I'm going to see if I can bring it out a bit more precise. Now, I've got to think very carefully about where the paint goes. So I think around here, just dab it on. And these blobs are just showing, on this case, this is the top of the head, I think, and they're just showing where the lightest bits are. Just go to there. I'm hoping that's going to work. And then I think I might run, see if I can make the top of a finger there. There's a lot more definition to achieve with this creature. But at the moment, I'm happy to leave it like that. I'm going to put that to one side. I'm just going to do a little bit on this trumpet player. using more opaque paint, more gouache. And just want to get in one or two little details just to bring out the figure. I think I'll say that's finished for now, just to have another look at the horse painting. So at the moment, this painting is still fairly ambiguous. It's still fairly loose and open. It's still not quite fully defined. And I'm just wondering if I could put his eyes in and see whether that helps. I kind of like that almost sort of rather disturbing look that that the horse is giving me. I kind of welcome that. It's always a balance between what goes on in your mind and what goes on in the rest of the world. It's got to be some kind of correspondence, but you know, how much is up to you, I think. I'm excited by this painting. There's something sort of mysterious about it, which I'm beginning to really enjoy. Well, I hope you can see that with watercolour, you are actually free to invent as much as you like. I think it's a good idea to start out with marks and with improvisation, and then only later on to bring in resources and sort of practical sources. But it really is, after all, a question of artistic expression. It's really up to you what you want to paint, and watercolour will allow you to do it.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go to our website skyartsartistoftheyear.tv